hello. Please let us know that you can see and hear us. Especially because YouTube likes to start later than Twitch, so Twitch is probably like, hell yeah, and everyone else is like, where are they?
Happy birthday to us. Happy birthday to us. Happy birthday, dear Lorebeards. Happy birthday to us. Yeah.
That was exclusive for Twitch chat. I just want them to know that.
No, it should pop up on YouTube as well, even if it's running a little bit late.
Okay, well, that'll be good. Come on, YouTube, wake up. There it is.
There we go.
Okay,
Are we live? Excellent. Good to see.
YouTube's like me. It's groggy at the start of the day.
Alrighty, I'm really looking forward to this one. But before we get started, as always, can you give us a quick ping over on your side of the internet that our volumes are relatively similar to each other and that you can hear us loud and clear?
Yes, we would very much appreciate that. And hopefully you're all having an excellent morning wherever you may be in the world. I've been really
or afternoon, because it's deep into afternoon.
Yeah, sorry,
over here in
morning,
the UK.
afternoon, evening, whatever. No, don't lie to me, Sean. I know I was listening to it myself. Do not lie to me. But yeah, this should be a really good time. This kind of honestly probably a bit of an overdue.
Yeah, a little bit.
One.
So today, if you didn't know already, we're doing a Q&A. We're doing a question and answer. And this is your opportunity to get all of your really obscure questions answered. Hopefully, assuming that they're not so obscure that we can't remember them. For example, a question such as, how are we two today? Which is a really big one for me because today, my youngest daughter left home.
Oh man, they've all flown the roost, huh?
They have indeed all flown the roost. I am literally alone in my house for what is going to be now my permanent situation with Lindsay and I. So we are now without children at home, and it is a very weird and kind of freeing feeling.
You're handling it emotionally better than I know my parents did.
Nah, I'm fine. I'll be cool. Whatever, kids, get out the home.
Oh man, yeah, I'm doing pretty well. Things are grooving and moving around here, but there's just a lot of stuff happening. But you know, that's life. When are things not ever happening? But
yeah, true fact.
Yeah, this should be a pretty good time. Once again, so like we are just answering anything and everything we can. Obviously, there will be a slight priority for things like super chats, but more than likely, hopefully, we'll be able to keep pace with them and be able to answer just some just random questions in the chat as well. So,
this stream, unlike most of our other streams, because we don't actually have any large sections of chat that we would like to get out there, we're not going to have all of those. Pause for super chat. Go through our super chats. Get back to the chat. This one's going to be pure chat. That being the case, it's quite likely that we will not only keep on top of our super chats, we'll be able to hopefully dive into many of them. But you do know that sometimes we're a bit long-winded with our answers, so perhaps we won't. We'll see.
Just a fun anecdote that is such a perfect example that makes me laugh so much. I was catching up on Lorebeards yesterday, and it made me laugh so much to tune into the Yume solo episode.
Lorebeards, or do you mean LAWhammer?
What did I say?
You said Lorebeards.
Oh, LAWhammer. I was catching up on LAWhammer, and it made me laugh so much at the start of the Yume episode. Andy going, "This is going to be a long episode about nothing relevant to the plot. If you don't care, skip this one." I was like, "No, I'm buckling in. How dare you!" That was a fun one, though.
It was certainly an episode. On that, just as a small aside, just as a small aside, for those of you who are out there going, LAWhammer, what the hell is that? It's our actual play, our live streamed Warhammer Fantasy roleplay, and it's also reaching somewhat of a birthday of its own. Not so much a birthday as the next episode, so that's this coming Friday, will be our 100th taped episode. Now, not all of those 100 episodes are online yet, because I've got a couple that I'm currently processing that are going up, but we're going to be doing a competition an art competition, because that's just fun. And there's going to be a fun little poster with every single last one of the 100 pictures that I've drawn for those 100 episodes on it. So I'm currently just finishing that off just now over on my computer, and it's a pretty damn big poster. It's gonna be like a big movie-sized poster with all 100 images with every single episode named, and it's a surprising amount.
You need to sell that as like just a print. I'd buy that.
Yeah, I might do that. I might put it somewhere. If people are interested, it could be an interesting piece of merch. But
make a more expensive version that's signed. I'll buy it.
Yeah, first 100 episodes. It's a thing. So if you haven't started watching LAWhammer, there's now 100 episodes for you to catch up with, but it's well worth it because our stories are thick, fast, and ridiculous, and we have loads of fun.
Yep. So, without further ado, I think we've enough.
I think so too.
So, you know what? I'm gonna let you hold on. Why don't we go ahead and get started with the first question? But then I just need to send out some alerts just to make sure everyone's aware that we've started, because I just realized I hadn't done that. So let's go ahead and pull up the first one. I'll just let Andy take a whack at it before I do. I'll let you read it off.
Hey, Captain Magma asks, would it make sense to say that perhaps the Skaven Under-Empire can't breach Koresh, with the reasoning being that snakes are good at eating rats? Nah. I think my answer to that would be just nah. Not because it's not hilarious, and of course it is hilarious, the idea of snake people being able to keep out the rat man people because snakes and rats. But yeah, nah, I think the Under-Empire has undermined the vast majority of the civilizations, if not necessarily all of their towns and cities, most certainly the civilizations as a whole. They are under there doing their thing. Nevertheless, for the humor aside, yeah, sure, because it's actually hilarious.
Yeah,
no.
Yeah, I very much agree. But I will say that is there a chance that there could be like an interesting relationship there between like the Naga of Koresh and the Skaven based on what we know? Absolutely. As far as that, based on the little snippets that we've gotten about them, you could very easily see that there might be like a relationship between Clan Molder and the Naga, which would be super fun. That the Naga supposedly are kind of turning out these horrible monstrosities that are keeping people out. And you never know, there might be things that they've dumped into the Under Empire, which makes that area particularly unpleasant for the Skaven. You know, it might be more hostile than, say, the old world is. But is that going to stop the Skaven? No. No. Sotek dumped a bunch of snakes into Lustria, and did that stop the Skaven from coming back? No. So they always come back.
Big fat no to all of that.
Any thoughts on the new Skaven minis? They're great.
Yeah, they're great. Yeah, really like them. I've made my dissatisfaction known that the Skaven haven't really advanced very much. All I've done is just basically make them the same as the old Warhammer minis with a couple of new varieties here or there. They're basically just, hey, let's rename that thing, but they look the same. They're effectively just the Skaven that we knew and loved from before, but not even reimagined, just replaced into Age of Sigmar. So I would have liked to have seen perhaps something new, while simultaneously really kind of pleased that you just have them. And they do make some pretty goddamn marvelous models for us Warhammery folks.
Yeah, it's they're quite nice. It's it's still a little weird that they're AOS exclusive. I hope GW doesn't stick to that for the far future, because it just doesn't make sense with the way they've designed the range, because it works for both settings really well. Even like the new toys they gave the Skaven still work perfectly fine in fantasy. It's like, oh look, they've got a bigger rattling gun that's on a platform. Okay. And like a new Clan Molder monster. Great. Like, and
was any of that not in Warhammer anyway? Unlikely.
Yeah, so it's, are they awesome? Yes, but I find they're a little overly limited for what they are at the moment. But hopefully GW will get their heads out of their butts at some point. Joe Mother, hey guys, you mentioned the Death Wind turning wizards partially ethereal. Do other winds do similar things? If so, like what?
Right, so first, it doesn't. It's a bit deeper than this. There's a couple of things to mention. Number one is the concept of the winds changing the people who use them, and this appears to be entirely human based. almost exclusively, in that the humans that focus on a single wind of magic tend to pick up marks from that wind. And those marks can be, if you're using the bright wind, for example, you might get jittery, your hair might start to turn orange or red, and you will just generally become a little bit more, shall we say, agitated in life. And with the wind of death, that tends to be you're far more solemn and morose. Your skin tends to pale off. You like to wear a lot of purple because that helps you channel your wind, but you don't become ethereal per se. But those who become so suffused with the wind, those who study it for a very long time and take it to extraordinary lengths, could start manifesting some weird oddities, one of which could be, like Elspeth von Draken, becoming a little bitty partially ethereal, for example. But if we take one of the most powerful wizards in the Empire that uses the purple wind, Viggo Hexenson, he's not ethereal. He is effectively immortal, though, and that is a different way that the wind can manifest. And every single one of the winds does something similar. And I don't mean immortal, he'll live forever. I mean, he just doesn't seem to grow old. He's effectively like a walking corpse that just doesn't die.
Good old Lich Tree system, yeah.
Yeah, he's been going for a good 100 years or so, and he seems to be going pretty strong. But all of the winds do these sort of things. Every single last one, if a human uses it too much, if you become suffused with the wind, things can happen. If you become suffused with the jade wind, you're supposedly going to stay vital for much, much, much longer than others would. If you become suffused with the amber wind, you become not only more, I was about to say attractive to beasts, that really doesn't sound good. Yeah, let's just say you become more atavistic and more bestial, and you as a you will become more like a creature in many respects. And some wizards have grown literal claws. Some of them have got eyes of beasts. Others have become large, wild, shaggy creatures. And each of the winds do manifest this way. So, loosely speaking, do the other winds do something similar? Yes. If you want to get some ideas of how that might manifest, go check out the role-playing games. For example, in the second edition of the game, inside Realms of Sorcery, there's a whole bunch of magical marks that are almost the source point for where many of these changes came from. And the reason that they got added to the second edition was because by that point, all of the miniatures that had been coming out for the Empire Amulets for the wizards they're a bit crazy. And each of the wizards were taking on some pretty odd traits. So they didn't just say in the lore, oh yeah, these sort of things happened. They made it part of the rules. And if you want to distance yourself from the wizards for just a moment and take yourself out of the world, what's happening is they're mutating.
Yeah, they're thematically mutated, which is fun if you want to think about that a little too hard, because then it suggests that the winds almost have like purposes, like how the dark gods have purposes, and you go, ooh, that's interesting.
Indeed, and that was something that became a core storytelling point in some of the books, where each of the winds were given almost character.
Yeah, but anywho, so check that out. You can find Realms of Sorcery super easy online, and if you want like a easy to find physical book as well, Cubicle 7's Winds of Magic book also has arcane marks.
It does.
But yeah. Let's see. Joe Miller again. Andy, pink levelers described as a buster sword. What do you think the other rune fangs might look like?
Okay, so this one, you've got two different versions of this that I'm going to give answers to. Number one is what the official lore is, and the official lore is pretty consistent in that if you take a look at, so as I recall, it was on the Griffin model. I think it was the Griffin model that had the Runefang weapon on it as one of the weapon options for it. That is what a Runefang looks like. And if you look at that model, it's almost 6 foot long. It's ridiculous. And you see the Master Rune of Alaric the Mad, that big square spiral, clearly stamped upon it. I used that one on multiple models for a variety of different things, because I had someone on a Pegasus, for example, who was wielding a Runefang. And they're really big, long weapons. They're almost double-handed swords. They are double-handed swords by any realistic measure. But if you actually go to the background for them, it contradicts the actual models, where the models were pretty universal in terms of how they appeared. The background was that each one of the rune fangs was created for one of the ancient tribal chiefs, what would become the Elector Counts to Sigmar, and they were created by Alaric the Mad according to their character, and each one was different. Each one had a different name, each one had potentially a different set of runes on them. They had obviously the Master Rune of Alaric the Mad, but beyond that they had, well, depending upon which version of the lore you went with, slightly different names, slightly different uses, slightly different appearances. And that's then where the second answer comes to this one. The official answer is they're all pretty much big double-handed swords that are sometimes depicted as single-handed swords. The unofficial answer, the one that I use, is each one is completely different, ranging from big, long, almost rapier-like weapons that were given over to Visenland, moving over towards the big, huge, massive double-handed peak leveler that's used in Middenland, going over to, say, Krali Gulgaz Crow Feeder, which is a far slender, darker metal sword, or if you go for, say, Gory Drengaz, that's Beast Slayer. Beast Slayer is a long, ragged weapon, which is the one that's held by the Elector Counts of Reichland. So each of them have got their own descriptions. I've been tempted multiple times to do pictures for them, at least my version of them, just because that would be fun, but it's also work. And currently I'm making a poster. I'm making a poster for, you know, all of our episodes. And I say that like it's taking a lot of work. It's just literally copy pasting some bits into a document. I'm doing mostly tons. Yeah, but it still takes time, exactly. So I would love to do it, I just don't really have the time. My health gets in the way right now, so yeah, let's focus on that.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it'd be nice to see GW put a little more emphasis on it, because like Games Workshop, the longer they've gone, the more the rune fangs have kind of developed personalities, especially within the Black Library books. Like I still remember, I think the first story I ever read that was like, oh shit, like look how crazy that rune fang is, was there's a...
Was it Rune Fang?
Maybe. It's the short story where they fight Grom the Paunch. It's where Grom gets fought, and Grom's like unstoppable utterly until this guy comes at him with a rune fang, and that rune fang's special property is that it burns. So it burns Grom, so he can't regenerate. Grom's like, oh shit! And actually ends up like running away. And it was like, oh yeah, the Empire like chased them off.
Grimzon, that sounds like they're because one of them is Grimzon, which is the unyielding sun, the old rune fang for Solend. And indeed it can, by just yelling Grimzon, burst into flame. Grimzon! Which is well cool. Yeah, you'll find that the versions of the rune fangs change according to each one of the writers, and it's a pain in the arse for those of us who like things to be consistent, because they just aren't consistent.
Warhammer, truly.
It's just,
it's why Zinch is the big bad.
When they were very first named, which was in I can't remember the number of the White Dwarf off the top of my head, which is really annoying. They had some pretty pants names, like some of them, like Brain Wounder was not necessarily the best one even to translate into Kalazid. So when we were building the new version of them, we used those as alternative names, often humans giving them the wrong names or mistranslating the original dwarf. So yeah, that was super fun. But yeah, they're all different.
Yeah, man, Joe, good old Joe, he's just pumping them out. The lady is all about knights, but there's no mention of class jumping. Can a peasant become a Grail Knight? Can someone from Musion be taken in? So, can a peasant do it? Theoretically, yes, but by the modern age, it's only happened 3 times has a peasant jumped up, and it usually goes really badly for them.
Yeah, I'll give you a nice analogy. Can women be Formula 1 drivers? The answer is yes. How many women are in Formula 1? And there we go. And that's not because of the demanding physicality of it when we move over to the knights. It's because Praetorians are sexist and weirdly classist and odd. Now, that's become less of a thing over time. And that has been eroded, but nevertheless, it still stands as one. Can people of a different type get into the thing? Theoretically, yes, but in actual practice, not really. The lady manifests with peasants in a very different way. If we go back to the original lore for the lady, way back to when she was first introduced in the 5th edition army list, it was quite clear that the lady was a god for nobles and peasants, and she manifested differently for each. At that point, the nobles, their duty was to protect their land, to go to war, to effectively effectively mince things in the name of the lady, where the peasant's duty was to tend the land and look after the land. So could a peasant be elevated to a questing knight and then eventually a Grail knight? I mean, potentially, but much like in Formula One, where there's no women really, and our Grail Knights, there's no peasants. It could potentially happen, but they have a different job. And their job is to tend the land. That is almost their birthright. It's what they're there to do. And whilst, yes, an individual story can buck that trend, in most situations, that trend is not bucked. The stratification of society is very much, very, very strongly held by the Bretonnians, and whilst that has eroded with time, particularly if you look at the New Old World, where the gender bias that used to exist has been completely removed, which is great, particularly given that the goddess is a lady, and it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman when you're a superhuman knight. When you have drunk from the Grail, it literally doesn't matter if you have boobs or not. All that matters is that you can kick ass and chew gum, and many the female knight can indeed do that. All they need to do is prove themselves. That's something that peasants generally in Bretonnia don't have as an option, because the way they prove themselves is by serving the land. The way that the nobles prove themselves is by serving the Grail, serving the people.
Yeah, it's they're like the way this is really addressed overall in the story is that I'll put it this way: Rapunzel de Leoness is like the only success story of a peasant rising up to a knight, and she doesn't become a Grail knight according to the original story. She basically
Correct.
She becomes a duke, which is awesome, or a duchess, but she doesn't go for the Grail. She settles into her role and seems to stay there until she dies of old age or whatever happens to her. But I remember there's a specific note of one of the like 3 peasants that jumped class, becomes a knight, goes to his first battle, and he immediately dies, because he just hadn't been trained in combat his entire life. So suddenly jumping into the role of a knight doesn't go well, unfortunately. But but can someone from Musion be taken in? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not everyone from that place is damned. The place itself is damned, but not everyone who has a lineage from there or even maybe come there is necessarily bad.
Yeah, quite. It's just one of the duchies of Bretonnia. And as much as that may sound a little bit basic, it is a duchy in Bretonnia, and it has all of the advantages of that.
Hoplite, is there a connection between Tiscali and Lamia? That, why Tiscali? The Lord of Strength. I'm not seeing one unless there's a specific. I
can't think of one.
Yeah,
I'm trying to make the link there.
Unless there's a very specific Lamian note that I'm just missing, which is very possible.
I can't think of one.
I will, when Andy's next answering a question, I will do some Google food just to double check. But I don't believe so.
No, I can't think of one. I'm okay, I really wouldn't mind where the question came from, Hoplite 8, as to why you think there is one. I'm not aware of one that I can think of off the top of my head, because Tiscali's just not, as far as I'm aware.
But we'll keep an eye out for you commenting if you want to.
Yeah, I'm watching
on that a little bit. Prophetum Nox, are the dragon children the only ones that can change shape because of Moon Mum, or shape changing something that other dragons could learn? If so, could that lead to dragon-blooded children from non-Cathayan dragons? So I will go ahead and kick in and say shape-shifting is not unique to them. That being said, shape-shifting when you find other places tends to be a very, usually like a spell. And there are dragons that can cast magic. Like, a lot of dragons can cast magic. So the fact that, just think about, the Amber Wind with Transformation of Kaden allows people to turn into big, horrible monsters. But theoretically, could it be used for someone to turn into something more humanish? Yeah, I would say absolutely. That being said, for the dragon children, it's an innate ability. It's not a spell. It's just something that's part of seemingly their physiology that they learn from their mother. And now, I will say the interesting aspect of using it to breed with another species to create a hybrid, I would say within the story, if that happened, it wouldn't shock me that much, but I don't recall there ever being anything remotely close to that. I mean, the idea of like, you know, in D&D, the idea of humans boning dragons or someone boning a dragon and it coming out with offspring, not at all a strange thing in D&D. Very normal.
Same
in
with
Warhammer,
RuneQuest and a bunch of fantasy worlds, in fact, yeah.
Yeah, in Warhammer, that would be pretty fucking unusual.
Although, not anymore. They're all over
not
Cthulhu.
anymore. Yeah, now there's like a ton of them.
Yeah.
But, like, could it happen? Yeah, I would say yes, but it would probably be a fairly rare circumstance.
Yeah, I'd agree completely. I'd in fact go further and say it's fairly rare and say it probably hasn't happened outside of the Dragon Kids, because the Dragon Kids are pretty special. And the Dragon Kids also are mandated to do it for the general benefit of Grand Cathay. It is a part of their duty to produce their Dragon Kids and all their, you know, the sugarcane. Dragon-blooded sugarcane. Can't get it in my head. In their case, it's part of what they should do, where the dragons have a completely different mentality. So if you had a dragon who, let's say, did have the magical capability to shapeshift, they don't have it innate. I agree entirely there with Sotek. There is not any examples of it. It's very much not what dragons are in Warhammer. The dragons in Warhammer tend to be big, ancient, powerful entities that can kick ass and chew gum and have magic. They tend to sleep for a great deal of time until one of the great incursions of chaos come and magic floods the world, and they tend to be invigorated and they come back up again from whichever particular cave they may have been in, come out and have themselves a good old, I don't know, chow down on the locals. Good times. But there's no examples of them wandering around as humans. This is not D&D, nor is it any of those other fantasy settings where that's a relatively common outcome. Not the case. So the only way to do it would probably be magic. And could it happen? Yes, but would it? You tend to find that dragons are far more interested in their own concerns, and their concerns are generally more eating humans rather than mating with humans.
Yeah, the dragons in Warhammer do not tend to be terribly friendly. And like they don't tend to treat with people. They're like, why would I treat with ants? Like, but
I mean, why humans? Why not a different species? You tend to, there's almost certainly the ability to change into sentient species in a shape-changing spell somewhere, but it would be super rare. And even where it does exist, why would they want to?
Yeah, I will note that I would say for the first part, definitely yes, because it's worth noting that Shen Yang did learn to change his shape from Moon Mom. She taught him a spell that lets him do that, so he can appear as human if he wants to. But he had, he learned that from her. So could other dragons learn? Yeah, but it would be super. Probably has never happened. I imagine they guard that knowledge rather jealously. Jacob Rohrman, is there any hope of high elves and dwarves as peoples overcoming their iron being friends again, or are they far too consumed by a cycle of hate? So there's a really good Black Library book about this specifically. And it's, oh my gosh, it's called, what's the name of it? Oh my gosh, it is right on the tip of my tongue. It was
not
either
on the tip of mine. I'm not sure which one you're talking about.
There's a story about the high elves reconnect with the dwarves after the Age of Vengeance, and the whole story is about them fighting against like a group of Northmen, and then in the story it's revealed that there are dark elf shenanigans that lead to some really horrible things. Because the whole part of it is that, oh my god, I can't remember what the name of the book is called. I'm so sorry, and I don't want to say what the ending is because then it spoils it.
Yeah.
But there's a book that's explicitly about this, and the whole thing that kicks it off is that there is an elf who traveled the world and was a trader and stuff, who befriended a dwarf who was a merchant, and they became very, very close friends, and they really strongly tried to encourage an alliance, or at least like a trade relationship between their hold and kingdom respectively, and it leads to a whole series of shenanigans. But if someone in chat can know what book Honor Keeper. Yes, it's called Honor Keeper. That is the name of the book. Thank you.
Well done.
Let me look up who that's by, because yes, Honor Keeper by Nick Kine, because it was in the old Dwarf Omnibus. That story is so good. It delves into a lot of really interesting topics. Like one thing it delves into, like what happens when there's mutation among dwarfs. It's a very good book. It deals with some pretty fascinating subjects. So is there any real hope? I would say there would be if it was not for the fact that the Warhammer world is full of factions that do not want this to happen. From vampires to chaos to dark elves to even people within their own factions who don't want it to happen for various political reasons. There are so many forces that are working against the high elves and the dwarfs kind of rekindling that friendship, that it would be virtually impossible outside of them facing like a really nasty mutual opponent.
Yeah. So let's say that the end times didn't happen. I know that sounds ridiculous, but let's say it didn't happen. And let's say that the elves bind together once more as a single people. We have ourselves our proper Phoenix King sitting on a throne, and we have ourselves some elves who are at their heart looking to make reparations for the crimes of the past, because those crimes were put in place by ultimately the betrayals of Malekith. And if they were repaired correctly, the dwarves would be honor bound to accept those reparations because of the way their characters and existences work. Now, would they be happy with it? Many wouldn't. Many would never forgive or forget, but others would move on. Once grudges are met, for all the dwarves grumble, and they grumble a lot, they tend to move on to a degree because it's a part of how their clan structures also work. When grudges work between their clans, and they may really dislike this other clan, but once the grudge is met and reparations are made, they work together again. So could it occur? Yes. Not just yes, like a big yes. Particularly if Malekith was the one who made that particular reparation. But it won't happen. And it won't happen for not just the Warhammer being blown up reasons. It won't happen because the chances of the elves getting back together and all of those reparations being made are next to nil. They're as close to slim to none as you can get without actually being none. It just won't be happening unless we have ourselves a cataclysmic event like the end times, and that cataclysmic event also ends the world. So I think the answer is no, but individual circumstances, yes. You'll get lots of high elves and lots of dwarves who will work together and will work together towards common goals, and who will put aside grudges and their cycles of hate or whatever else it may be. But broadly speaking, in terms of the overall factions, yeah, no.
Yeah, there are a lot of
it's part of
legless
the core. We yanked it from Tolkien's story.
Yeah, there's a lot of legless and Gimlis out there.
Yeah, there
in the
is.
Warhammer world. They're all over the place.
Totally is.
Okay, so I just want to jump to this one at the end real quick. Hoplite, clarifying Tiscali Lamiads and the vampires. You mentioned the old ones that Tiscali is powered through influencing event, which sounds very Lamian. And old ones have connections outside of Lamia, any ties to vampires. So, I will say that is probably not a thing. However, the idea that there is, if you wanted to play around with the idea that there could be some kind of old one machinations behind some group of vampires, or there are vampires that have an interest in the old ones, and there's a relationship there, I think you could find something, but you'd be going into unexplored territory. You'd be forging your own path. I wouldn't say there's much in the material that supports that, which actually I will say is kind of interesting when you consider what the old ones really are. I would say the idea of a Lamian or a Necrarch having a very notable interest in the old ones would actually probably be very likely. But it just, as far as the lore that we have, it's not really something you see explored.
Yes. So I'll go back to my initial answer, which is no. There is no direct connection between them. And not only is there none in the lore, there's not a direct connection in terms of how they work either. However, you tend to find that there's not direct connections between anything until a writer comes along and goes, I'm going to wrap these two up together. And is that something you could wrap? I mean, you could, but it would be an odd wrapping in terms of how the Warhammer lore normally approaches both of these two individual, let's say, pieces of knowledge. Our Lamians and Tiscali are not exactly natural bedfellows in terms of making sense of being together. But I do agree that having Lamians who might be interested in what that particular, let's say, story involves, definitely.
Yeah,
Lamians themselves would be interested in pursuing, where the other side, next to nothing.
Yeah, I would say it would be more likely that you have like a Lamian who finds like a plaque of Tiscali and manages to translate a notable part of it and is like, oh, there's some interesting stuff here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. Thank you for streaming on your birthday. Well, happy birthday, Jen.
Happy birthday! Happy
Hope you're having
birthday
a good
to
one.
you and us.
How does Marathi take bats? Probably overtly sexually, to be frank. But though it's funny to imagine her in just grungy, boring bats. Like
Yeah,
the one
never.
time she's an
There
extra.
is nothing. There is nothing that isn't epic and peak about Marathi and everything that she does. She is a translation of Melnibonians directly from Michael Moorcock, because I need to get my mention in there at least once. And they
Check
do
your bingo
not
card.
take simple baths.
I should
mean,
make Lorebeard bingo cards. Those would be fun. I should
Yeah,
do that.
you're right. Marathi and her big baths of blood to keep her youth. Marathi and her big, huge baths of who knows what's going on in there. Most certainly busy. But broadly speaking, epically.
Yeah, I would agree. Hendrik, what cult do you think needs more exposure in?
Anyway, then.
Ooh,
So
I
I have a few things, Hendrik, that I think are worth diving into here. First, I think that the Purple Hand needs a better resolution. I think that if we flip over and look at the other primary cults that are mentioned, particularly when you look at the Red Crown, that needs to be better handled. The Jade Scepter could have been better handled. In fact, all of them could be. What was always a bit interesting about the Enemy Within was that it's largely a Tzeentch plan. So that either needs to be properly reinforced, or alternatively, if we're looking for the Enemy Within being Chaos Within, possibly some good subplots with other cults, like, for example, say the Tinian Fellowship, to help boost up and prepare for the end times, because the Tinian Fellowship was set up by good old Festus, and that's a completely different cult, but this time over a Nurgle. And it would have been really nice to have perhaps a Khorne cult, particularly given where the central part of the third part of the Enemy Within series takes place, which is in Middenheim, and there is a primary Khorne cult there, which became a central focus point in Ashes of Middenheim, which is for 2nd edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Indeed, they even used the same group and mentioned them inside some of the material for the Enemy Within, but didn't use any reference to that cult at all, and I think that could have been a fun aside too. But the real one is the Red Crown. That's the one that I think was handled most poorly, and the Purple Hand, and fully understanding what it's doing, could arguably have been handled better too.
Yeah, I would very much agree with the Red Crown stuff, especially because if you read some of the later things with Cubicle 7, you could tell they want to do more with the Red Crown, because they keep bringing them up in a lot of the sidebars and being like, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this as optional stuff, while just they're following along with the story that they decided to print. Because one of the things I forget which book it is. I don't remember if it's the companion book for Death on the Reich or if it's another one. But there's a whole thing where they're like, oh yeah, if you want to make the Red Crown more interesting, consider using Moonclaw. And it's like, well, why didn't we just do that? Because that would make so much sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, there was before I left, there was significant plans for how many of these cults were going to be handled, but obviously I left, none of that actually occurred. So if I was to pick out one, it would be the Red Crown.
What are is that Liver Bubonicus or Senchmeister? What are you asking here?
Lothar Bubonicus?
Yeah, what are Bubonicus and Flame Fist up to? I don't even know who we're talking about. What?
Werner Flamefist? So a bit more clarification. We'll watch out for your comment down
Yeah,
there, just to
I'll
make
keep
sure
an eye
that we
out
don't
for
get
your-
that question wrong.
Andy, want to adopt me? I cook, clean, and work as a patient transport, says
Well,
Hammond.
we have space in our house nowadays, so we're definitely looking for cooks and cleaners around here, because we're lazy.
Oh, Lothar Bubonicus and Werner Flamefist. Oh my god, I'm gonna have to.
The old Tzeentch character, and Lothar Bubonicus, the Nurgle character from what, like the Realms of Chaos book?
Oh wow, yeah, that is a big reach back. Yeah, Demon Princes.
Kinda.
Yeah.
They ascended, sorta.
Yeah, from the Oh well, I mean
Realm of
they
Chaos.
are mentioned in 7th edition.
Yeah, they get a little mention here or there, and that's about it, as I recall. And loosely, they're doing whatever you want them to be doing because they were never really played with beyond being the example characters from the studio for how to use the rules for your own war bands that are presented in Realms of Chaos.
Ah, okay. So the idea, okay, so they fought each other is the whole thing. If I'm understanding this correctly. Oh no, that's a different character.
No.
Yeah, I mean they're chaos characters that have some things going on with them. They're not. They haven't been mentioned in quite some time.
No,
outside
really.
of like showing up in some fun little.
Not that I recall, anyway.
Yeah. I'm looking at both of them just to make sure, but yeah, they're pretty light. Yeah, these are characters that get some they get some cool stuff in Realms of Chaos Lost and Damned. But I mean that's an old book. That's a very old book.
Remember Lothar well in particular. Burner Flamefist, a bit less. Like whatever.
But it's like what are they up to? I don't know, whatever chaos people are up to.
I mean, they can be up to whatever you wish them to be up to because they haven't been used. They've been left alone, so that means that they'll be probably part of the end times doing something. They are, in the greater scheme of Demon Princes, very, very new. But as we know, time doesn't really mean anything inside the Realm of Chaos, so they could literally be used in any way you wish.
Yep. Wind Turning Leaf, how connected are the chapters of the Dwarfen Craft Guilds? Is there an overall leading guild counselor, a high guild master?
So, answering this is a little bit like creating your own lore, because each of the holds have got their own way of handling their own clans. You got to remember that their clan structures and their guild structures are ancient. For some of the holds, thousands upon thousands of years old. And whilst the Karakankor as a whole sits underneath one great high king, each of the holds have got their own king, and they are all ruled and handled differently. So the general answer to this is, are they connected? Yes. They've got a variety of historical connections where they've been working with and against each other, and they all, as is often the case with dwarves, very stubbornly think their way of doing things is the correct way, meaning that for all there are significant connections between them all, they're not really held in the same fashion that, say, for example, I'm trying to think of one that would be like, say, for example, the colleges of magic in the Empire, which are basically one institution. This isn't one institution, it's lots of clans and guilds. And they are not competing per se, but they don't have, at least as it currently stands, someone who stands over them all, like a high king that stands over all the kings. No, each of them would not bow down. I mean, who would be that representative?
Yeah, so
nah.
What I would say here is that what you generally see in like the army books is that there is usually a hold that's associated with having like the largest of a said guild, and so they kind of tend to be a little. They tend to be like the most famous version of themselves, where it's like, Zufbar's Engineer Guild is like the best because they're really, really big, and the hold pours a lot of its resources, and they wield a lot of power within their hold. Usually it's that they have a lot of like weight, they have a lot of say, where it's like, over in Karakazul, like the smithing guilds and a lot of the creation guilds that work with the runesmiths tend to have a lot of sway. It tends to be more of what is their political structure within the hold itself, but like Andy said, there's not like a I am the high guildmaster of the mining guilds located in Karazakarak, so I oversee. No, they're all very individualistic. They talk to each other, but it tends to be very centralized within the holds themselves, as opposed to any kind of overarching structure.
I'm going to bring up a quick question there from Fernie. We plan to, but we have a lot of super chats to get through, and we would obviously like to make sure that everyone who has thrown money in our direction to give us lunch makes certain that they get good answers.
We are reading the chats though, so
totally.
If like you ask a question and like it really jumps out, we might try and grab it, especially
totally.
if it's like a really short, little easy one. But yeah, so hopefully that answers that one turning list. That being said, within a hold itself, you would have a guild master, but there wouldn't be like overarching between the holds. Hyles, as mentioned from the Empire tier list, how much of Nuln is influenced by Talea with culture, clothing, military, and other sus?
A significant amount, actually. Talea has a larger... well, let's just go through the whole lot. The language classical first came into the Empire through Nuln, and it came from Tilia. There was a primary trading post in Tilia, and it has been connected down through to Tilia from one of the underground passes through the vaults, which is a great river that connects Tilia directly through to Visenland. The very first Temple of Verena was in Nuln in the Empire, and that was before Sigmar was a thing. So before Sigmar had even kicked along, there was already a Temple of Verena teaching language in Nuln. So classical buildings are far more common in Nuln than they are in other parts of the Empire and in Visenland as a whole. So that's the classical architecture that we would generally perceive as being Greek or Roman influenced. They have Greek or Roman influenced architecture across Nuln, far more prevalently so than they do elsewhere, particularly amongst those older buildings that have survived the various invasions by Grom or whomever else. As it comes to clothing, much less so. They don't have any strong influence in their clothing. Their clothing is far more Empire-centric. In fact, I would argue that they tend to push fashion at the leading fashion wedge of culture rather than necessarily adopting the culture of others. Their military, though, whilst they do follow the state army model put in place by Magnus in Nuln very closely, they do have a very big mercenary contingent and hire a great number of the mercenaries from Tilia. So there's a lot of people speaking Tilian and being employed as mercenary companies into Visenland. So loosely speaking, Nuln is pretty heavily influenced by Tilia, but in no way would you say that it makes it look that much different to the rest of the Empire, although they do have more classical architecture, and there is more of a prevalence of the classical gods, to use that term, our Verenas and your Shalias and your Moors and similar in Nuln. So loosely, yeah, quite a bit, but not that much.
Yeah, I'm just going to grab a couple of these because he rapid fire. Is Orion a creature of flesh and blood? When he manifests, yes. Otherwise, no. But mostly, yes. This one, I actually want to I'm curious. Ralph, can you talk about the night market of Nuln real quick?
Gosh, I really wish they'd done more with this. The night market of Nuln does get used a little bit over in Forges of Nuln. So go check out the book Forges of Nuln, which was for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition, and is a book that dives deep into Nuln in general. I don't necessarily think that it handled everything that could have been handled well in there, but the night market gets a pretty big chunk in that. But you're right, the night market isn't used that heavily. It's big... all the mutants et al. That are down there. So that it's somewhere that is used. Go check out Forges of Nuln if you want to see a bit more about that.
Bohemian, watch your Khorne stream, was startled about Khorne being a smith. Does that mean there is a respect for dwarven smithing by Khorne? All the best. No. Yeah, Khorne is not a. He's not. I would not call him an appreciator of the smithing arts. He just is a smith because it fuels the war machine. Was probably the best way to look at it.
Yeah, I will say one more time. We didn't say that Khorne was a smith. What we said was that Khorne has a great deal of smithing going on within his realm. The great deal of armorers doing armory things. That doesn't necessarily mean that Khorne himself was or is a smith. Having said that, though, it's quite clear the connections there are extremely strong. The artifice, in particular, are very strong, particularly when you look at Khorne's demons, which are, in most cases, even that which looks like entirely flesh and blood, metallic and constructed. So be aware that there's a link there, but I would not necessarily say that they respect dwarfs per se, given just how frenzied and over the top Khorne tends to be.
Yeah, I don't think Khorne respects anybody. He's a hateful son of a bitch. C4N, Andy, would you rather adopt Hammond or Gelt?
Holy crap sticks.
Truly a dilemma.
I mean, Gelt could be quite useful to, fix some pipes in the house.
True, though he might start just turning them all to gold.
Yeah.
It's because he can.
I mean, I'd be okay with that. You know, I could sell that off. We'd be good, and then it would turn back to the base metal, and I get put in jail. Fucking Gelt. He's ruined my day again.
Exactly. You get Andy in legal trouble. Donovan, hello. Both more general question, but do you prefer versions of the lore where the old ones seem to have known every single thing that would happen, or versions where they had a general plan but things went wrong? I know I'm definitely in the latter category. I like the old ones as more fallible.
So I'm going to re-pitch this question and say, do I like the old ones as transcendental creatures that are perfect, or do I prefer them as an ancient spacefaring civilization that fell? And I, broadly speaking, prefer that. I don't like perfect old ones. I think that makes them less interesting, much less interesting. Where if we have what is effectively just, and I do say this as bluntly as I can, they are just technologically advanced psychers. And whilst that's perhaps more mundane and less interesting to many, to me, that makes them more interesting. It means that their artifacts are not put in places because that's the outcome that they wanted. Although having them collapse and having the end of their civilization be predicted by their various members, or many of their members, having the arguments, I think that's great. Seeing them more as, say, kryptonites, people from Krypton, rather than necessarily as gods. Superman is not a god, but many like to depict him as Jesus.
Yeah, there's a there's a guy on YouTube who does what do you call them? Like the really, really long videos that delve into the topics of like video games and stuff. And if you look up like really long video essays on the Chozo from the Metroid Prime series, there's a really good thing in there about how if you go and like really delve into the Metroid Prime trilogy, the Chozo as a race, for anyone, I'm not going to explain who they are for anyone. If you know, you know. But the Chozo, one of the things that it talks about is that they are a race that can very much see the future, influence things that are going to the future. But one of the things they see in the future is the fact that they're all going to die and how they deal with that. And that is very old one adjacent, and is a very, I would really recommend looking into that if you want some good ideas about why I like the old ones as that version. Nitrite Space Cell. Hi, I was wondering, how can so many influential secret organizations coexist? Lawmen, Skaven, Chaos Cults, Yuan Bo, etc. can make the formal power do a lot of things, but can also act on its own.
Right, so I have a general answer to this one, which is going to be pretty disparaging of this idea. And that's that worlds are really big. And I do mean really big, with lots of competing factions. And the Warhammer world is, by comparison, really simple. Really simple. You see many competing influential factions, where in the real world, we have not just more, we have almost exponentially more. Multiple governments, multiple great companies, all of which are working both against each other and attempting to keep secrets, or take those secrets from other governments. This is not a large number. This is like 4 or 5 here. A large number to me, if we were looking at world politics, would be several hundred, which is just isn't the case. We have a few competing entities here. It's not too much to keep on top of. So broadly speaking, my answer to this one is hi. Is wondering, how can so many influential secret organizations coexist? Easily. The world is huge. Lamians, easy. Skaven, easy. Chaos Cults, easy. Yuan Bo, Exile. I don't think it's much of a problem. The Warhammer world's more than big enough to cope with it all, and simultaneously more than big enough to have some know about some of the bigger picture and others not. People who work in MI5, for example, here in the UK, know an awful lot more about the secret services around the world than, say, for example, your average person on the street. Somewhat similarly, people at the top of Empire government know far more about, say, vampire influence, or perhaps the Skaven, or something similar than others do. And that's just the nature of how secret organizations work. They're not entirely secret, but they mostly are.
Yeah, and remember, they're all not like sitting in a room. It's not like there's a Skaven, a vampire, a Chaos Cultist, all sitting in a room together talking to the mayor. It's this very intricate webbing system of people pulling on influences, of people being double agents, of people being not even realizing they're being manipulated by cults or acting in the interest of cults. life's complicated. Just think about how complicated like just your local town politics are if you really sit down and think about everyone that's trying to influence them locally and outside of locally. And like you should really dial it up to 11 because that's what Warhammer's all about. Oh no, I already asked that one.
We don't need more of that.
Yeah, he asked that twice. That was the second version of it.
You really need to know.
Yeah. Darius Rose, for my previous question last week about megafauna and forcing gods, is Stromfels equal to a megalodon and Sotek to a gargantuan? So
I mean, Stromfels being associated with a megalodon, I don't think would be much of a stretch. Giant shark god, giant shark.
Yeah,
I mean, in the greater scheme of things, sure, but you've got to also remember that just because something is associated with a thing does not mean that it has entire control of a thing. And some beautiful examples of this are across the Empire with the various animal totemic creatures that are associated with gods. Not all wolves have anything to do with, for example, Ulrich. The various wolves are being ridden around by goblins, for example. They're not Ulrich's wolves. They're just wolves, big giant wolves that goblins happen to be riding. Somewhat similarly, just because it's a shark doesn't mean that it has to be Stromfels, but that does mean that Stromfels might reach out through it. And similarly, Ulrich might reach out through one of those wolves, make one wolf buck and charge in a way you didn't expect if it was, for example, approaching one of the priests of Ulrich. So broadly, yes, but no.
Yeah, I would very much agree. There's an association there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are the same thing. Because shit's complicated. Hey guys, thanks for all the hours of juicy lore. How do Empire infantry fight against the other factions infantry, especially since they're just humans?
Okay, I'm gonna really tackle really heavily the word just. Humans are quite extraordinary, and we shouldn't forget that. Humans are not the weaker species of the Warhammer world. They are in ascendance in most of the Warhammer the world. They just are. It's mostly human empires. The dwarves are not in ascendance. They're falling. The elves are fading. The dark elves have a small corner of the world. It's the big human empires that dominate. And the reason they do it is because they're relatively fast in terms of their reproduction, and they work together in groups, in societies that protect each other in ways that others simply don't. And whilst you might get a great tide of orcs, the formations of men working together once they've trained tend to be more than sufficient to hold off against the brutality of one species or the strength of another or of magic of another. Humans are super capable, and just because they might not be as strong as one or as vicious as another or as agile as another in no way means that they can't outwit and go to war with these other species and win frequently. They know how to do what they're doing in the various parts of the Warhammer world, and they have gods on their side, which is something that is not a common part of the Warhammer world. The gods manifesting through magic are definitely there, but they've got magic too. Humans have magic. They've got their own magic. Humans are weird. So do not think of humans as being these incapable idiots who are going to get stomped by everything. They simply aren't. They're faster than dwarves by some significant measure. They're tougher than elves by some significant measure. They're far more controlled than orcs by some significant measure. They sit in a spot in the Warhammer world that is the sweet spot. I would argue, and this is possibly going to make many people go, yeah, what now? I would argue that they are the strongest race in the Warhammer world because they are.
Yeah,
undisputably.
Human adaptability and...
It's not even adaptability.
Well, no, how innovative they are, how well they adapt to the different strategies and climates of, like, you have, like, Norscan humans are very different than Empire humans, are very different than Bretonnian humans, and humans are just scary, to be frank. But as far as like the Empire specific, the Empire really takes like jack of all trades, but also master of all trades, as opposed to master of none. And training. Training is a big fucking deal. Yeah, sure, that orc's bigger than you. It's basically the equivalent of a big angry gorilla running at you. But if you and your four mates all have halberds and you plant at the ground, put your foot on it, and you all lean forward, and the orc runs into it, orc's gonna die. Now it's going to be ugly and it's going to be traumatic, but you're going to kill it. And that's the thing about humans is that I agree very much with Andy that honestly humanity's sense of community is a brutal weapon.
Yeah.
Brutal weapon.
And
that
far
really just
more
sets
so
them
than
apart.
many realize. The high elves are lost up their own arses. The dark elves are too busy bickering. I mean, elves in general bicker. And they just don't like others. The dwarves are slow. They're just slow. They don't take to battle particularly well. They're very good at defense, but that's about it. It's an interesting mixture of species in the Warhammer world, and if you compare like for like, humans generally come out on top because they can choose their battlefields far more carefully.
Yep. But yeah, Empire is actually like, there's a reason the Empire is a pretty giant nation that's really spooky. And when it unifies, it's borderline unstoppable.
It's the most powerful nation in the old world, and the old world is generally perceived to be one of the most powerful in the world in terms of its overall capability. So yeah, they're not.
Never underestimate a good line of halberds backed up by gunpowder. Shit is spooky. Watchdog, how lucky is the 9 winds of magic are the refuse of minor gods? Big use of quotations.
So first, strictly, there's not 9 winds of magic. There's 8.
Yes.
The dark wind is not a wind, and high magic is not either, and ice wind is not strictly a wind of magic either, depending upon which versions of the lore you go with. You will find them being described as that in one place or another place, but in general, it's the 8 winds of magic plus all the others. Are they potentially the refuse of 9 minor warp gods? They have been marked in more than one place as being controlled directly by demon gods, in that the demon god Ulgu throws the wind Ulgu out from the Chaos Gates, for example. And the fragmentation of magic into these threaded winds of different colors is said to be controlled in some pieces of the lore by minor gods. But that seems in some respects to be an anthropomorphization of the clear winds of magic that are perceived by humans et al. And isn't necessarily a true component of what's happening over in the aether. So is it the case? Probably not. Could it be the case? Yes. Is it the case as far as some are concerned in the Warhammer world? Yes. Some of them believe it's the case. And that belief alone, if you go with some versions of the lore, means that it probably is the case. So there's a lovely contradiction here where both I'd say absolutely not, don't be ridiculous, and also, yeah, it's an inevitability.
Welcome to the realm of chaos. Hio says Pix. How do the Norscan tribes work with this culture? Does the tribe have many separate tribes? So there's a really, really, really god tier, S tier book called The Tome of Corruption, which dives in super heavy to Norscan
I'm glad
culture.
you said it's god tier. I helped develop that book. Thank you very much.
It's a great book. It's an awesome book. And it was a godsend for Norska because it really took them up and said, you know what? They're not just the crappy part of the Warriors of Chaos roster. Mm-hmm. They are their own nation. Well, they're more like a collection of nations, to be honest. Where like the term Norscan is not something the Norskans even use. That's not how they see themselves. They see themselves as their tribes, not as, oh, we all are on the continent Norska, therefore we are the North Sea. It's a lot more complicated than that. But as far as how do they work within their culture, they're humans. Some of them are at war with one another. Some of them trade with others. Some of they marry one another to build relationships. They fall apart. They had family ties and they broke apart. They're complicated people.
Okay.
Now,
yeah, I think this can be summed up quite quickly, given we have a freaking ton to get through. So here we go. Are you ready? Think of Vikings. Got it. Make them polytheistic. Got it. So we're now worshipping lots of gods, and the 4 chaos gods are a part of their pantheon. And that's how they work. They're Vikings that have a polytheistic setting with the 4 chaos gods who are literally on their doorstep as a part of their pantheon. It's not prescribed in Norska in the same way that it's prescribed in the rest of the old world. So Norska is just different. And that is great. And that was a significant change to what it had been for a while, where the old Chaos Marauder miniatures got combined with the old Norse miniatures. And they said, these are the same. where beforehand the Old Norse were just Warhammer Vikings. And then those Warhammer Vikings became Warhammer Chaos Vikings. And then with later writing, they went, actually, all the old lore is also right. We have both Chaos Vikings and non-Chaos Vikings and just Vikings. So how does their culture work? Go take a look at Viking culture and add a polytheistic setup with a strong leaning to both the old world gods and the chaos gods all in one place, because that's practical, because they're on the doorstep of the realm of chaos itself.
Yeah, they're actually, especially in Tome Corruption, they're a very, 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 very cool culture, because you will run into things you won't expect, because they very much challenge the idea that, oh, if you acknowledge chaos, you must be baddies, or you must be chaos worshippers. The Norskins heavily challenge that, because they're very practical people, which is really fun. Back to the draw. Happy anniversary. I was always wondering if Azhag would eventually have become a Mortarch, seeing as greenskin undead exist, or was always just a tool. So there's a really... Azhag is a very fun, bizarre individual. Becoming a Mortarch is a very hilarious sentence to me, because I don't think Nagash would have ever really wanted to deal with him if he didn't have to. Nagash is an entity that utterly despises individuality and things that break his order. He would never willingly deal with greenskins because he hates them. He
the lack of control.
So would he have ascended Azhag? No, I don't. Unless he could have killed Azhag and resurrected his corpse to be some kind of powerful Krell-like entity, then yeah, sure. But like as Azhag as we know him, no. If Nagash had the ability to like get his crown back, he would have struck Azhag dead the millisecond he could have. Because if anything, Azhag
quickly drop a couple of theirs. Yes, they were, but not always. Many of them weren't. So particularly later on. So I figured it was worth stating polytheistic right to its core. And as another question there, the other winds, there was Orch was the orange wind, and pink was sleeve.
Yes, and those are older stuff. You can find them in some older stuff. They're hard to find. They're very hard
to find. They were originally put in place by Marian von Stauffer when he was working his way through other colors. But yeah, they're out there.
Diamond, giving creative assemblies naming quirks in a certain short story, I propose a new faction, the Murders of Geeseman. Yes, the Destroyers of Grammatical Knowledge, yeah.
Oh, no.
David, Micah, who do you think reached a better understanding or attunement with Shyish souls? The elves or the Tomb Kings? Glad
Elves.
I could make it to an episode live.
Elves. That might be controversial given what happened with the Lands of the Dead and the mortuary cult and everything else. But that all came also, bluntly, the greatest developments of that came from the elves also. Broadly speaking, the mortuary cult and everything that it learned was because of the push from the Gash who'd already learned everything that he needed to learn from the elves. The elves are the ones that understood it at its best, and Shyish at its best. But in time, Shyish, because of the very nature of its being drawn to dead, would mean that it will be drawn to the Tomb Kings, but still the best mages, and generally speaking, are the elves. And I don't necessarily want to say that, but that's pretty much how it is.
So what else? I'll say that the way you phrase this question makes it difficult for me, because what I would say is that I think the Tomb Kings reached a level of understanding of the human soul that nobody else really ever got to compare with them. However, they have a very specific, it's a really narrowly specific form of knowledge that has a lot to do with their specific pantheon, their specific beliefs, and a very specific intersection of magic that is really complicated in that, yeah, they're the absolute best at it because it's really narrowly focused. But I wouldn't call it Shyish. I wouldn't even call it souls. It's a really weird specific subset that has a lot to do with divinity.
Which is why I fall back on elves. If we're just keeping it with Shyish and understanding of how the magic goes, it's the elves.
Yeah,
if we are talking about if we're talking about necromancy, if we're talking about the process of life and death and mortality with humans and divinity, then we're in a different place.
Yeah, I agree.
But if we're just talking about Shyish itself, it's the elves.
Yeah. Bartkey83, hello guys, can you explain why Manfred is the best character in the lore? Unironically, Manfred von Karstein is an excellent character. Too many people shit on him because of the end times, and it's literally the equivalent of like the Archaon getting kicked in the nuts by Grimgor thing. It's a meme that kind of got so out of control because it was popular that now the character's just completely covered in mud because of a meme.
Yeah, Manfred, I think, is a great character, and one of the best reasons for that is because initially he just looks like, if you go with where the lore originally came from, a kid of Vlad von Karstein who basically followed in his footsteps. But as the lore was developed over the course of time, particularly when we look at books like Liber Necris and the various other developments, we find out that Manfred is a far older, far wiser, and a far more interesting character with a great deal more going on with him. So broadly, great character. Best character in the lore? I disagree. One of the better ones, though, I do agree. And was he shit on by the end times? Let's find out when we turn to our end time stream next week.
Yeah. We'll talk about that next
we're
week.
diving into that one.
Yeah. But he is one of the best characters.
Yeah, he's great.
He's absolutely fantastic. He's
purely because he's had more depth.
Yeah, he there's so much written about him, and people just don't know any of it, and it's sad. Darius Rose, in terms of characters, which ones do you think are more like in terms of personality, and which ones do you admire and want to be like? Oh, which ones do you think you're like in terms of personality, and which ones do you admire and want to be? For you, okay, Darius, I'm going to be honest. If you think you're similar to Queen Headtaker, Luther Harkin, and Grimgar Ironhide, please go to therapy immediately.
Whoa! Oh, fuck.
Please get therapy.
You tend to find Warhammer characters are often, as we often discuss as we move through parts of the lore for Warhammer, dialed up to 11. They are rarely just people living their lives. They are often people living their lives who are then confronted by extraordinary circumstances. Their hair goes bright yellow, they aura up, and they go to war. As they Super Saiyan their way through a particular issue, somehow surviving incredible odds. And then later on, someone makes rules for them and go, well, the only way they could survive those incredible odds is if they are possessed by a god. Hence Gotrek, where Gotrek was just a freaking troll slayer. That's all he was. He wasn't anything special.
And then he just got too many books. They're like, how are we going to justify this?
But he went crazy, and crazier when they made him for the Warhammer side of things as well. So I tend to find that in the greater scheme of things, I don't admire most of the characters in Warhammer because most of them are broken in one fashion or another. And whilst they might be given this super heroic, over-the-top version in, say, for example, the War game, or if you go over to the Total War game, you often just get a single aspect of their character. When you get behind who most of them are, they tend to be pretty broken individuals. So I'm not really one for admiring them. I much prefer writing about them than being them.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. If you look at any Warhammer fan, I'm going to be very blunt here. If you look at any Warhammer fantasy character and go, I want to be like them, get help. Help. They are all deeply troubled individuals that have a lot of problems. All of them. Now, I would love to have like a sit down with some of them, but do I admire any of them? No. God, no. No. But I like a lot of them. Sam Passmore, as we all know, the Dark Elves often deploy captured Hydras or Blood Ones. Laura, is there a Queen of Hydras or something equivalent? And lastly, how long is the Hydra's lifespan? Oh boy, I wish we had. So, okay, what I'll say is there a Queen of Hydras in the lore? Not that I've ever heard of, but would there be myths about a creature like that? Yes, I would say that. Like definitely. The origin. Where did this thing come from?
The Hydra part of the Dark Elf story is not as in is not given as much depth as the dragon part of the story, because of the close nature of the dragons with, and I'm going to say it one more time, Michael Moorcock and the Melnibonians. They basically uplifted that lore and dropped it, and then they went, the Dark Elves also have other monsters too, and then didn't really run with it very much. And in different versions of the background, sometimes that's been a strong preference for Hydras and big sea monsters and big sea dragons, and sometimes manticores, and sometimes other things too. So you'll find each version of the lore adds a little bit extra, but they've not really done a Queen of Hydras, although I think I agree there definitely would be one. As for their lifespan, again, not mentioned anywhere that I can recall, and I'm really diving through the books in my head here.
No, yeah, they don't. They're even when we get bestiaries for Warhammer, unfortunately, they don't tend to be very scientific in that. Like, it would be nice if the bestiary was like, here's how big they tend to be, here's how much they tend to weigh, here's their physical traits, here long they tend to live. Yeah, it'd be nice if it took that approach, but it doesn't. It takes a very... Yeah.
Originally, when the second bestiary came out, because T.S. Looker had written the second edition bestiary and had taken a particular line with it, and I asked T.S. to sit down for the fourth edition version of the bestiary, and we were going to take a very different line, which was going to be based around 6 characters, all of which were going to be telling a story within the bestiary throughout. And each of the bestiary entries, each of the, but I think written by just one writer. I was going to have 6 different writers doing it. Okay. Each of the bestiary entries were going to be a scientific block in the corner with then different variations of how they express throughout, with the story running through as well. So we were going to do that. It was going to include weights, heights, lifespans, typical habitats, all that sort of thing. Turn it into a proper bestiary, so that we could say, look, we're doing things differently to what had come before on the second edition, because we didn't want it to be a repeat. But sadly, that didn't occur. So sadly, we don't have full answers for this. But if I were to hazard a guess, Hydras, I think, would be one of the longer lived species, particularly if you look at the classical myths of the Hydra, where, you know, you cut off its head and 2 come in to replace it. They're very difficult to kill. Yeah, very old. So you'd be probably looking at age for our Hydras, and I probably would be looking at even doing the classic Warhammer thing of some of the older ones being the bigger ones, the ones that have managed to survive for a very long time, and some of them coming, the oldest ones probably being in the great underground seas underneath Nagaroth. Probably.
If you want to do, as far, I will say, for when you're dealing with a queen type creature, one of the things that AOS did that I actually really enjoyed is AOS played a lot, first edition especially, played around a lot with the idea of there being like primordial sires or mothers of various species kick around. So like the father of the Charybdis is a character that plays a part in a myth. So there might be a mention of the Queen of Hydras in there, but I don't recall off the top of my head. Jonathan Scott, creature design challenge. A natural predator of the Skaven which exists is sort of a boogeyman stuck in their tunnels that they can't spell. Already exists, it's called a Trigara, and it's fucking terrifying. They're giant praying mantises, and they are fucking horrifying.
Insect people love it.
Yeah, and the Skaven are scared. If you want a really cool one, go read the Thankful trilogy. A big nasty Trigara shows up, and based on Thankel's reaction, you can realize, oh, these things are fucking terrifying. Maglodron, sometimes I forgot for the Lamian stream, but are there any Lamians in Nagashazar, and how dangerous is it for them to be there? I would say I would be shocked if there is not a Lamian of some sort keeping tabs on Nagash's body. That would be impossible to me that Neferata would not have someone always keeping tabs on him to make sure he does not move.
And to tackle the second part, would it be dangerous? Yes.
Yeah. Nagash's, being anywhere near him is dangerous. Downman, although there aren't any written connections between Gudvar and Hashut, do you think there could be? Could there be? Sure.
I mean, connections, interesting. Gudvar is the old tribal god of Ostland. So as far away from Hashut as you can get. And I think that any connections that exist I wouldn't write connections there, largely because I would be looking to create a Hashut that was dwarf facing, not human facing or human deity facing, or alternatively chaos facing. And Guvire is neither chaos facing nor dwarf facing. So I would be looking to separate them and build something unique for Guvire if I was building up, say, for example, a cult of Guvire and how that Red Bull manifests over there. Having said that, though, the Red Bull of Guvire and the Red Bull of the Great Taurus is undeniably very similar. So could you build those connections and could you make them work? Absolutely. But I'm one of those people who prefers to make the world feel bigger rather than smaller. And the more connections that you make between these disparate forces, the smaller the world becomes. And suddenly you feel like you're on Tatooine in every single fucking mention of a game, because that's the thing that everyone does. And yes, I have been playing the most recent Star Wars game. And yes, it is in fucking Tatooine yet again. It makes the universe feel small, and somewhat similarly with Warhammer, if you tie everything together with pretty little bows, it makes it feel smaller.
Yeah, because the true nugget of Warhammer is that all the gods are really just Lilith in a different disguise. Darius, how are female ogres treated in the tribe, and what are they like? Are they treated as equals due to being smaller, treated poorly? So ogre women have gotten talked about more and more as the setting has continued to develop. From everything that I've ever read about them, the ogres do not have strong sexual dimorphism, in that the males and females are borderline identical. There are slight differences between them, but at least from a human perspective, they are very similar looking. There's been a lot of art of female ogres that have been coming out recently through Cubicle 7 stuff, and they are basically the exact. They're just as big. They're just as strong. There doesn't seem to be any major differences between them like there is between humans, male and females, for instance. Even to the point that a lot of like how they just look physically, very, very similar. Very similar.
Yeah, so in terms of stats, they're pretty much identical. In terms of size, as I recall, I've drawn them a couple of times as well. I was literally just looking up my version of them. So I have my version right here. So I've drawn a couple of female ones. And in fact, in my one, the female one's slightly taller than the male one. So yeah, the sexual dimorphism is relatively low. They are treated just like any other ogres. Indeed, there was a fun conversation that was had behind the scenes where it's like, you know, all those pictures of ogres, bunch of them are female. And that was not necessarily an amusing point per se, but it was a point that you as a human might not be able to tell, other than the ones going, well, that one's got big breasts, yeah, but so does that one, because most ogres got relatively heavily developed chests anyway, because they appear fat, so it's sometimes difficult to tell. So broadly speaking, how are they treated? Just like any other bloody ogre.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. If that tyrant isn't a gendered term, tyrant is just tyrant. So the fact is, a lot of the tyrants that you know of, a lot of them could have been female, and you just wouldn't know until you were made keenly aware of it, which would probably be an unfortunate circumstance, depending on what you're into. Captain Magma, what is the deal with skin wolves? Can they change form at will? Are they chaos spawn? Where do they come from? So skin wolves specifically, which came out with the Monstrous Arcanum towards the middle/end of 8th edition, are a type of werewolf that, if memory serves, they can change at will. They are not bound to like Morsalib like some are. They are able to basically get themselves worked up into a frenzy and they transform. And they change back and forth rather consistently. So they transform into the wolf. The wolf literally bursts out of their body, which is why it's called a skin wolf. It's because all the scraps of flesh hanging off of it are the body it burst out of. And then when the fighting is over, the big wolf body collapses and a human wetly, which is very gross, wetly like crawls out of its
out of the monster it used to
out
be.
of the wolf body and is back. So are they chaos spawn? Not by the technical term of a chaos spawn, because a chaos spawn is someone that has received so many mutations that their mental, anything that gives them like an identifiable like personality, intelligence, or whatever has collapsed under just the sheer weight of mutation, and they're an unrecognizable horrifying mass of whatever.
So yeah, skin wolves are a mutation, but they're also not. They can also be part of a curse or some other potential issue in the Warhammer world. Skin wolves, generally speaking, burst out of the wolf, out of their human form into wolf, shedding their human flesh, then out of the wolf into human form, shedding the wolf, and bits of that flesh is left behind. They're bloody, cursed creatures who tend to frenzy and are over the top, crazy and mental, and I love them. But in this particular case, where do they come from? That's not strictly answered. Chaos is generally the first line, but
yeah. So
it's difficult to
in the
pin
Monsters
down.
Arcanum, the ones that make up the unit it's a blood curse. So it's a genetic thing. Is how it's spoken about in the Monsters Arcanum, but it mentions that there are other kinds.
Yep.
And that not all of them strictly work that way. But if you see them marching with the armies of Chaos or a Norscan army, they are probably descendants from a particular set of tribes that have a particular blood curse. Or a blessing is how a lot of them look at it. And
yeah,
I
totally.
will say, for the old world, I am very, very pleased the Skin Wolves got brought back as just part of the Warriors of Chaos roster in the new Arcane book. That is really fun. CV4, last week you mentioned that the old ones had probably worked on other planets. Is it possible there are multiple versions of the Warhammer world and this accounts for discrepancies in the lore? Failed attempts to make Age of Sigmar. That's
yes.
That's a fun,
yeah. So
hilarious thing to say, but yes.
I literally had this conversation behind the scenes because you've got 40k and Warhammer used to be part of the same setting, and in the 40k setting you have Earth, and Earth looks like the Warhammer world. And therein lies an answer. Why? And part of the answer for that is old ones. And that isn't necessarily a good answer, but it is definitely something that could account for it. So is there multiple worlds out there that may have a similar look to the Warhammer world? The answer is there could be. Not yes, but there could be.
Yep. Unseen Archives recently went back to your Lumming episode. What if the Lost Dragon Shinzu ended up in the Silver Pinnacle? Fun potential plot hooks. You could absolutely play around with that. That would be interesting, but you could absolutely play around with it. Of Neferata having a light dragon guest. Sure, why not?
Why not?
Hi, also six. Now, okay, so I do want to say, more realistically, I would say it'd be more interesting that Neferata would likely maybe know where Shinzu is or have heard various rumors about where she is, which could tie into a fun thing about finding Shinzu, but I highly doubt that Shinzu would visit vampires. Hi, also six. Currently, my character in the Wolfram game is going through a giant marsh near Karlberg and was wondering, are there any famous haunted marshes in the Empire?
Several. The most famous haunted ones, as in haunted by ghosts and the like, are over in Sylvania, and there's a bunch of them over there, whether it's Helfen or Grimmoor or god dang it, the big one, there's another one down there, it'll come back to me later. But the Empire has lots of marshlands, and not just like 5, 6, there's loads of them, ranging from very big ones up and down the length of the Reich that lead down to the Cursed Marshes by Marienburg, up through the Grutscher Marsh that's on the border between Marienburg and the Empire, to the Ferdians, to the Altdorf Flats, up towards the Sigismund's Folly. There's a whole bunch of them, and all of them carry their own, often deep and haunted stories. One of the biggest ones is the Schaden Sumpf, which is about 110 miles to the west of Middenheim, and it's a huge marsh that sits up there, and most maps of the Empire tend to forget exist, although occasionally someone goes, oh yeah, there's one up there. Another very famous one is the Midden Moors, or the Mirror Moors et al. It gets renamed and repositioned with every edition of the game, whether it's going to be called Mirror Moors, which is attached directly to the gnomes, or the Midden Moors because they don't want to discuss the gnomes. There's different versions of it, but the answer, loosely speaking, on this one is yes. Karlberg has one of the bigger ones as well, the Ferdians sitting right on it. But if you want the most haunted ones, go over to Sylvania, and I'm now going to sit and try to remember what the heck that marsh is called.
Hyos is actually in my campaign. We're doing that later today. We found a Fen Beast, and we're fighting a Fen Beast. I'm not looking forward to it. Night Garage, catching the stream while waiting for my flight Dublin to Amsterdam. Can you talk about my best boy Apparash to see the strongest swordsman? You could argue that he is. There are some writers that think he is. It was very apparent when Josh Reynolds was writing the Masters of Death that he considered Abarash to be the strongest swordsman ever. Period. Is he realistically? I would say no, because there are some characters that make him look like a little babby. In like age comparison, and age tends to be a very powerful thing in the Warhammer world. Where the older you are, tend to be the scarier you are, with rare exceptions. And Abarash, in the grand scheme of the world, isn't like he's old. He's incredibly old. But when you're comparing him against the standards of like the ancient Saurus or the elves, he's not at all. He's only like 4,000 years old.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
I would say among vampires, is he the greatest swordsman? Yes.
You know what? I think he might actually be.
He
he might actually be. If you are being fair, and we are looking at what is the entity that has spent the most time working on his swordsmanship, it's going to be Abarash. There are very few things in Warhammer which have weapon skill 10. Your Greater Demons of Khorne, your best Dark Elf Assassins, that sort of thing. And Abarash would be right up there, and that's where you are going to be pulling out your best swordsman. And you often find that your ancient Saurus or your ancient High Elves, they tend to be around about the 7 to 8, 9 area. They tend to be not quite as good. They are not spending all of their time fighting and trying to perfect their fighting. They're doing other things too, whether it's being a great general or whether it's just surviving because the Warhammer world's tough. Where Abarash, he's focused on that shit in a way that many others just simply don't have the inclination to be. He's ADHD to the hilt. And if I was forced to choose one, he would be, I think, not a bad choice.
I think he's absolutely a contender. Yeah,
contender. I mean, I could then go and fight a different version of this fight with, say, I can even think, go over to my Dark Elves.
I will say Abarash suffers very heavily from a character that is spoken about enough that he has like a mythological status, but then he just doesn't get any focus because there's almost like a curse where every time a writer is about to write a lot about Abarash, for whatever reason, that project falls through.
Agreed.
Which is weird, but it's just kind of the way it's been. He's awesome. Like, he's a super cool character. The only time I can recall him losing a fight is he lost to Gilles Le Breton. But Gilles Le Breton is a goat. And even then, that's almost more of a myth. Like, there's a relationship between the two of them, but what exactly that relationship is very fuzzy.
Plus, you've also got to realize that Abarash is a bad guy, which means that Abarash will be used as a foil for a good guy, as in he will be used to be beaten by a good guy. Regardless of his escapability, according to what the lore would be, they will kick him in. Because that's what happens with bad guys. Poor old Archeon suffered very badly from that throughout the course of the 6th through to 7th edition, for example. And very badly. Well, who are we going to have kicking Archeon this week? They all suffer from Worf syndrome. How are we going to make this card to look hard? We'll have Worf get beaten up by it. Okay. Got you. Yeah,
he's up there, though. He's up there. Sean Steele, Ale for the Dawi have special properties. I understand it isn't magical, but alchemy. Considering the seeming importance of Ale to the Dawi, where do these brewmasters stand in society? Your Bugmans of the world, for example. Very high. Very high. Like, a skilled brewmaster is like, he is on the King's Council type level.
Yeah, the brewing guild is a very important guild. It's that simple. It just is.
They're very high up. Necromancer Cobalt, you mentioned the altar of strength that the winds of the colleges can feed the people's desire to riot. What traits of the high concentration of each of the 8 winds tend to cause any good examples? Ooh, a very brief version, Andy.
Bright wind.
Off the top of your head, what if there was like a high concentration of like Shaiish? What is that going to do to people?
Oh, well, that's not going to send them to riot. If we're talking, so what would each one cost? Okay, got you. Okay, so, there's so many things
like
you
the
could
short
say.
version.
Grey will bring suspicion, politics, and backstabbing nastiness as people become exceedingly paranoid. If we go to an excess of Heish, people are going to start overthinking everything as your brain starts filling full with all manner of different ideas. Totally. It's the wind of intellect and the wind of that'd be crazy. Too much Azir, you're going to become what? Azir is a mixture of hope and future leaning. And you know what? This is one that I wouldn't mind sitting down doing properly, because I don't think I have.
Great question, Necromancer Cobalt.
I like this one, Cobalt, because I haven't, because I've only focused in on generally grey and brights, because they're the ones that often went out of control. And Shyish, for example, that's going to bring a great deal of contemplation and grief and sadness, and a whole host of things are going to come
that
up.
actually is a really interesting question.
Yeah, it's really interesting. What's going to happen to the populace of Altdorf when that particular college is... and it's one of the issues that I had with Gelt becoming patriarch, because they didn't change Altdorf. One of the Altdorf's core traits is the constant riots, the constant issues. And that was because Akshwe was at the very heart of the colleges of magic there, because the Supreme Patriarch of the 8 colleges was a bright wizard, had been for a long time.
Large amounts of shaman do to people?
Well, shaman turns you into all over-calculating. You are working towards, if anything, that's where you're going to get lost in overthinking everything, because you're going to be working through, and the greed that comes with that wind as well. You become more avaricious. You're going to become more dwarf-like in some respects. And there's
but also
weird
maybe more industrious as well, which is interesting.
Yeah, exactly. There's a whole bunch of stuff there that need to be unpacked, because each of the winds doesn't just have a single trait. They have about 10, 15 traits. And how are they going to manifest? And I think that's not going to be a short answer. In some respects, I think we could probably do this as a stream or something like this.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would recommend you hit up Andy on this, maybe on like Tuesday or Wednesday or something, like just remind him on Discord, because I would like to see Andy have a couple days to think about that.
Yeah, there'd be a lot to go into this one. I mean, just thinking of each of the wins and the ramifications that it would have when they're out of control with the people. Oh, that would be great. So, Necromancer Kobold, I think my answer to this one will be, let's do this more fully later so we can have a really good in-depth run on it, because I think it'll be fun.
Too much Gyred, just orgies, break out.
Yeah, there's too much life and fertility magic running around all over the place is going to be an increased level of sexual activity across the city. It just is.
Hilarious.
And that's not going to be positive in many respects. You've got to remember that the winds of magic are chaos winds, and that is something that people tend to want to forget, because a lot of their favourite characters use these winds. When things get out of control, they tend to go badly. And something like Gyren going badly is going to be grim.
Yeah. Mageldrath, can you talk a bit about Archon the Black? Is he just an extension of Nagash's character, or is he his own character, aside from loyalty? What is his straight? Okay, so Archon, I belovedly like to call him Mini Nagash, because he kind of looks like Mini Nagash.
It's such a shame he's not that.
Yeah, but he's not that. Archon genuinely is his own individual. But Archon is a really great character, because he is a full-on lich, and he is the first big bad one that we see Nagash create. And one of the things is that Archon himself, one of the things that's enjoyable about his Black Library books and things I think a lot of people like about him, Archon himself isn't 100% sure if he is purely himself or if he is more of what Nagash wants him to be. And that is a personal dilemma he suffers from. But that also kind of goes to show that he is really, in many ways, his own individual, but he has doubts, which is not something you would necessarily expect from an undead lord. But what are the big traits of Archon? Loyalty is a big thing. Archon is one of the most loyal followers of an individual, to such an extreme extent that he suffered a pretty agonizing death just to give Nagash time to escape during the first war where Nagash got defeated against the Priest Kings. And the thing about Archon is that there are different versions of him as far as what exactly his background is, where you have the really, really shitty, I hate it so much, Mike Lee trilogy, where Archon the Black is just kind of a random asshole noble in Khemri, which sucks and I hate it. And then there's other stories where Archon is quite literally almost like an orphan off the streets, that like this person that was truly and utterly being crushed underneath life that Nagash saw potential into and raised up, and Archon has this genuine deep love for Nagash, but of almost a worshipful or fatherly sense, as opposed to just like, I'm a good soldier. Because Archon, Archon is so far beyond I'm a good soldier that it's goofy. He genuinely sees Nagash as something other. Like Archon is Archon. I would go extremely far as to say, as far as human characters I've ever seen in the setting, Archon I really do think is the most loyal to such a deep extent that he would put everything on the line for Nagash, and I hate how ill explored it is. Because for whatever reason, writers wanted to give him and Neferata a love story, which just made no fucking sense at all.
Yeah, didn't like that. So is he an extension of Nagash's character? Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be relatively controversial and blunt with it. Yes, he is, because what Nagash wishes, Archon will bring to pass. So in some respects, he absolutely is. What is his core traits beside loyalty? Why does he need more core traits than loyalty as far as Nagash
I would
is
say
concerned?
obsession. Obsession is one for him.
To a degree, but he's dead as well. And a lot of his obsession is, I don't necessarily think it's core. I think it's just a part of who he is. The religion of Nagash is very much at the heart of what he is nowadays, I suppose. He used to have more character, I think, than he had later, but I don't think the diminishing of character in terms of making him unique and interesting as his own separate individual is in any respect would make him better. I don't think it would make him better. I prefer him as he is. I think he makes a great character because of his loyalty, his dedication, his obsession. And in some respects, if you want him to be a reflection of what Nagash wants in the world, the less character he has, the better. Because that means you can see the terrifying reality of what Nagash's rule would be. If we give him tons of character and he's got loads of character, he's off, I don't know, romancing someone or being really angry or being something like that, then it diminishes what Nagash wants. And Nagash wants law, order, and peace. No gods, no chaos gods, no nothing. Everything is underneath his control. And the more character we give to Archon, the less character Nagash has. And the more we have to go, why is Nagash letting Archon do all this crazy shit when Nagash is supposed to be trying to take over the world, isn't he? And make it all undead and stuff. So I'm quite happy with Archon not having a great deal of character. And I feel that makes the Nagash story potentially better.
Yeah, I also would agree that one of the things that's really nice about that particular version of Archon is that it makes him, and the way he operates when Nagash isn't around, very interesting, because you have him genuinely trying to figure out, without Nagash being there, doing his best to try and fulfill Nagash's will without necessarily knowing exactly what it is, which leads him into some interesting dilemmas. But if you read through just the army books, a lot of Archon's focus is obsessively trying to reclaim all of Nagash's artifacts.
Yep.
Which takes him a really long time.
And I'm cool with that.
Yeah. Darius, Kidslayer, the Dragon Ogre, is just a regular one or a Shaggoth? Since it's said to be the most powerful animal in Throg's army, he has giants, a Gorgon, and Jabberslith, etc. If it's a regular one, then holy shit, I guess. I honestly don't know. The way the story's written, it feels like it's more like a Shaggoth. But
you got to remember, as we discussed in the Dragon Ogre stream, there's more than just Shaggoths and Dragon Ogres. There's a few levels of Dragon. There's a spectrum of Dragon Ogres, and it's a big Dragon Ogre.
Yeah,
it's a big Dragon Ogre.
Agree with that. It's not called a Shaggoth, so it's probably not a Shaggoth. But it's
not one of the Shaggoths, but it's a
the
big Dragon Ogre.
The unit champion of a Dragon Ogre.
It's a big Dragon Ogre. Yeah.
Which, to be fair, Dragon Ogres, if you go watch that stream, are very fucking scary.
And they're awesome too.
Very spooky.
Do go watch that stream. Good fun.
Garg, I don't want the lizardmen to be just robots. While not human, can you explain the nuance, personality, individuality, particularly in the source? Hey, go watch our Tenuan stream. We talk a lot about that.
Yeah, and I would argue bluntly, they're not. That's it.
Yeah, they're just not. The best way I can explain it to you is that from a very human perspective, they can come off as automatic robots, but they're just not. That's not what they're like.
They've got their own personalities, they've got their own gods, they've got worship cycles, they've got tradition, they've got a culture. They have everything that is required for full personalities. It's just that they are not human, so their personalities don't shine and come through in the same ways that others do. And they have, particularly with the advent of Tehenowin et al. Afterwards, a deep well of emotion that's very different to human emotion, but is nevertheless still there. So yeah, they're not robots.
Yeah. Archimagia, also go watch our old one stream, because we talk as well about like how the blessed spawnings tend to emote in different ways and how they tend to be represented. There's a lot of go check that out. Archimagio, since Age of Sigmar was the plan all along now, do you think the old ones intentionally altered / broke some gods into chaos gods to destroy the world, and the new races were the baited trap to draw them in? No.
No.
I think so, that would go too much.
Actually, I might actually contradict myself here. The corn stream, because I'm going to say no, categorically just no. But the corn stream, when we were discussing the Brass Citadel, which we went, we got the idea there that there's a story with corn. There is definitely a story there. And if it was the plan all along, then that story was also the old one's plan. And whatever that story actually was, it was the old one's plan. And if you go with the old ones were transcendental entities that completely wanted Age of Sigmar to come to pass for whatever reason it was, the rise of the Chaos Gods or whatever, then they will have sought to control and organize the birth of the Chaos deities in a fashion that meant that they would not be as powerful as they could potentially have been, which means that yes, they will have done stuff to try and make them birth in a particular way. And the Warhammer world, you could argue, is the core of that particular birth. And what the old ones were doing would have been done to help control that. But if you go with the standard background, no.
Just
no.
Can mercenary sellswords be elevated to a knight due to virtue of performance?
There's loads of knightly orders that take in actual sellswords. I mean, take, for example, the White Wolves of Ulrich. The White Wolves of Ulrich are not nobles, although some of them are not brought in because of virtue as we understand the virtues of knights. Their virtues instead are capability at arms, ability to fight on the battlefield, which most sellswords are typically good at. That's all that's required. All you do is approach the cult and go, I want to be a White Wolf. You're a White Wolf now. You'll have to go through our training, go through all the rest of it, but you will be a White Wolf at the end of it. There is a host of different ways. Further, I will say elevated is not necessarily a term I would use, given that many sellswords are already freelances. They are already knights.
I feel like this question would make more sense about Bretonnia than the Empire.
And if we just stick with Bretonnia, then are you noble? If the answer is no, then much like our previous peasant question, the answer is you're unlikely to get there. Because that's just not your place. You are bucking society. Could it occur? Yes. Will it occur? It's unlikely. But you could write a really good story, a really good book about exactly that occurring.
Yep. Oh, yeah. That actually would be kind of a fun story. Some random guy getting elevated to knighthood, and then he has to deal with Bretonian society.
And then dealing with the Bretonian issues, shall we say.
Yeah, a sellsword. You have to listen to the chivalric code now. He's like, shit. Darius, in terms of which occupation fantasy generic characters only, what would you be? For me, it's an ogre tyrant. Also, to piss off 40k fans, a regular tyrant could beat the shit out of a Primarch in terms of raw strength.
Wow.
Primarch. Darius is just coming for people. So
Darius, you're going for it, Darius.
Darius believes he's an ogre tyrant, and also identifies personality-wise with Queek, Luther Harkin, and Grimgar Ironhide. Darius, don't ever come to my house.
So I don't know, what job would you want to be inside the Warhammer world?
So I think there's a difference between what would I want to be and what would I be. Loremaster.
There you go. That was an easy one. That's what the old dwarf career of Loremaster.
I think there's a part of me that's like, I don't know, for how long I like to sleep between stints of doing anything, I could see myself being a Slum Mage Priest, but then you have to work while you're sleeping, which sounds lame. So yeah, I'd probably just, honestly, just Dwarf Loremaster or like a Varenin Scholar.
Yeah, Vrinian can't go wrong with that.
And I would probably die at a very young age, more than likely, because the Warhammer world is spooky.
It's a grim place. And perilous.
Centermeister, who's worse? Elf top god? Oh, who's the worst dark elf top god? Lolth or Kane? Lolth. I feel like Centermeister, I don't know if he misspelled something or if he's bringing up.
I'm going to check that one as well.
Let's see.
There's
Forgotten
a Realms. It's Forgotten Realms. Of course, it's Forgotten Realms.
Okay. So,
yeah, I was like, I know this one. I know this one. I know this one. Rather amusingly, I've even written this one. Cain is not the top god. Okay, I'm going to say it.
That's a cheat answer, and you know it.
Cain is not the top god. Cain is an exceedingly important and central god to the Dark Elves, but is not the top god. Aneth Rayma, for example, has arguably a better claim to that.
So who's worse, Lolth or Cain? Who would you rather be stuck with?
Neither of them. Cain's an absolute arse. Lolth is much better. That being the case, Cain is probably worse.
There you go. Luigi, Karl Franz is my favorite Warhammer Fantasy Battle character in his version that writes Death Gods. Great statesman and a good person. But I feel like Andy doesn't like that version. Which Franz do you both prefer?
Okay, so I'm going to contradict this. I don't dislike the version. I dislike the one-note nature of it as it's often presented, in that he's perfect at everything that he does. They're always the least interesting characters to me. And Karl Franz has unfortunately been written in multiple different ways. This is only one version of who Karl Franz is, and the other versions aren't better. They're just different, and they are sometimes deeply contradictory. What I dislike is Karl Franz being contradictory. Different versions of Karl Franz not making sense together. Broadly, I don't really like that. Which Franz do you both prefer? I prefer Karl Franz being Karl Franz. All of the above. A character that's complicated, difficult, and has more than a single facet. A gem rather than just looking at one single side of that gem, a whole complete entity, not just he's freaking perfect at everything that he does, look at him go, which just sadly is less interesting to me.
Yeah, I would very much, I would agree and say that I love Karl Franz the human, which means that he's complicated, he's made mistakes, he has trauma, he's been through shit, and now in the Total War timeline, he's in his 40s or his late 30s, early 40s or whatever by that point, and he is
40s.
Yeah, he's coming along and he's awesome and he's cool, but there are some skeletons in the closet, and I love that version of I love the Total War version. That whenever I imagine Karl Franz, I imagine what he looks like, what he sounds like. For me, it's the Total War version, but I like him to be complex and complicated and like a true leader, an emperor, which is that there would be some shit hiding beneath the floorboards. Which the 8th edition version, that's not what he is. 8th edition Karl Franz is like he's Sigmar Reborn. And
he's
but
a demigod.
He's less complex than Sigmar, which makes him boring.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answers that. Watchdog 3079. What are the attributes of the pink and brown winds of magic? Wrong answers only. Well,
okay,
you use 2 for one and 1 for the other.
So wrong answers only. So the pink wind is the wind of girls, and the brown wind is the wind of poo.
Yeah, that's basically what I said. Sir Panza, you guys are Light during dark days. Love you now. More content, faster, longer. More rants about grain transportation. Don't get us. Listen. I would love and hate for y'all to somehow trick us into doing a stream on like the the mechanical day-to-day operations of the functioning of various empires around the Warhammer world.
Yep.
Sean Schultz, do elves ever call out other elves on their elf bullshit?
All the time. The elves are some of the most political, backbiting, snide species of the Warhammer world.
They're mean girls.
Yeah. For a while, the High Elf Army list even had a special rule where your general wouldn't necessarily be the general.
Intrigue at court. Annoying as fuck rule.
Yeah, brilliant rule. Loved it.
It was great. It was super fun.
So do they call out each other for that shit? Yeah, all the time.
Oh yeah.
Dark elves, high elves, wood elves, all elves are complicated creatures who all think they're right, and that means that other people are wrong, and you have to point that out, don't you?
Yeah, and elves do some absolutely insane, crazy things that make other elves look at them and just roll their eyes into orbit. They're very dramatic. Fast Times at Ridgemont High. That's a reference to something that I don't know because I
don't know either, Hammond. Sorry.
I'm not cultured. I'm sorry. How do greenskins reproduce in current lore? So, okay, the cheat answer I'm going to give to try and keep us moving, and if Andy wants to add a whole bunch, he can, is that it's basically spores, and the only book that covers it in any detail whatsoever is the Skarsnik novel.
Yep. And, So it's complicated and controversial, because some people in Games Workshop don't like that for Warhammer at all, but other people from Games Workshop do. And that's why it's complicated and controversial, because the writers themselves have not landed on an answer. And whenever an individual writer has, and has boldly taken it in one direction or another, it has broadly almost since the 4th edition, really, it has been in the direction of what 40k presented. And if you want a description of how it works, go read Gorka Morka, the 1st edition, because it's got a breakdown in Gorka Morka of the orc life cycle.
Yes. Yep. And that's basically just what the Skarsnik novel uses.
Yep.
It's messy. But that also kind of makes it fun, because greenskins really feel like a race that the more chaotic and confusing it is, feels very appropriate for them in a lot of ways. Hoplite, clarifying to Scott. Oh, we already did this one. Aha, because I jumped ahead. Michael White, in Total Warhammer 3, where you choose factions, has enough room for, say, 9 more factions. If correct, which... Okay, so by faction, I assume you mean, like, completely separate playable faction. So
I'm going to say, Michael, I don't want to answer this one, because we're going to be answering this one in 2 weeks' time with our wish lists. So in 2 weeks' time, we're doing a wish list for Total War. 3, obviously, for Warhammer 3. And we're going to be going through all the stuff that we would like to see, either additions to the existing factions or entirely new factions. This isn't what we expect or a realistic list. This is a wish list. And we'd like you all to turn up with your wish lists too.
Yeah, we're going in.
Like to see.
We are going in hell-bent on the intent of making the developers watch that stream and go, fuck. That is the goal. Laughing God, do you think they would ever revisit the purifying Warpstone plot line? Like someone discovers the dwarves had succeeded or reinvents the wheel? Go read the War of Vengeance trilogy. There is a fantastic fucking storyline in it about the dwarfs fully having the capability for fighting Warpstone, and there being a party that you might not expect who really does not want them to figure that out.
Yeah, so the whole Warpstone thing is, I think, one of the big stories of Warhammer that wasn't properly handled, because it is... Oh, yeah, do you want to say something?
Yeah, all I'll say is, this is a current plot line, because it's the plot line with Grand Cathay. They have purified Warpstone.
Yeah, it should be... in some respects, I would have liked this to be part of the End Times tale, because the purification of Warpstone is a real-world analogy of nuclear power and being able to draw power safely from extraordinary danger. And the process of that is a great analogy for real world events also, and I feel that this could have made a great story. So should it be revisited? I think is being revisited in some fashion. Do I think it would potentially make for a great mess of a storyline? Yeah, particularly with the "it succeeded." Yeah, it has it.
it's very central to Zhao Ming's storyline, which is great because it's having consequences on him as a character, which is great.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that it's almost exactly the same story as the formation of the Colleges of Magic, because that's using chaos to safely channel magic. It's basically turning the raw stuff of magic into definable and achievable powerful effects.
I'm going to use plasma to fight fire. Great.
Exactly. Fire to fight fire. Much like they did at the Piper Alpha incident when they blew it up. So if you don't know what that is, that was a massive oil rig just off Scotland that went on fire. It was a terrible disaster. And Red Adair came along with international rescue and they blew it up to get rid of the fire. So they used fire to literally fight fire by blowing it up and wiping out the flames that were going. It was an extraordinary part of the whole tale there. But yes.
21CS, does Slanesh have a special claim on Elf Souls? Yes. Yep.
It's special claim is different to has taken claim.
There you go.
So, but yes.
Yeah, CP4N. What if Krimlo mediated between the elves and Dawi? Then would
peace.
They would team up to kill him and realize that they like each other more than they thought.
Kremlo is just Norse slan. So in the greater scheme of things, I don't think he'd do very well.
He'd walk into the room and say croak, and then go what? Aleph Flux, happy birthday! What dark deeds will we need to perform to get Andy to release the Fishman stats?
You would need to perform particularly dark deeds. We would need to sell out of my entire first print run of dark deeds, which is currently sitting in the corner. I don't even see it. My finger's right beside it. If you're watching the stream and not listening, that's my copy of Dark Deeds right there. You should go buy it. It's great fun.
Yeah, I recommend it. I played it. It's very fun. Warhammer Fantasy Battle is your guys' home, but do you have any homes away from home? Vampire the Masquerade for Andy comes up sometimes. Any chance we get a vacay to Sotekville by night? So I will say, like, my guilty pleasure universes tend to be like the Legend of Zelda universe. I'm big into Legend of Zelda mythos. Y'all don't even know. Y'all don't even know. But I tend to spend a lot of time in like video game universes. Because here's my thing. I really like watching video essays on YouTube. That is my guilty pleasure. Like Elden Ring lore videos, I'm there. Dark Souls, I'm there. Bloodborne, I'm there. Zelda, I'm there. Like I just eat lore from other things for breakfast. That's just what I do for funsies when I am trying to sleep at night. So yeah.
I'm similarly someone who greatly enjoys video games, and because of that, I have a host of games that I have played and completed multiple times in some cases. I like my long-term RPGs and action RPGs, so I like my Dragon Ages, particularly like my Mass Effects, as my hat will make quite clear. I like my Horizon Zero Dawn. That was really good.
Yeah.
Horizon's a great game. Loads of fun in that. Obviously, the old standouts, your Skyrims and your Fallouts and similar. When we turn to roleplay, Vampire the Masquerade is a game that I played for a very, very long time, but I've kind of moved on from that these days. Even when I see the newer versions popping up as computer games, they don't entice me the way they used to do.
Unfortunately, so. I've heard the original, like the older one is like goated.
Yeah, Bloodlines is great. Yeah, good game. Enjoy that.
If you're ever wondering, like you know what I'm like, the new Zelda game that's coming out where you actually get to play Echoes of Wisdom. Oh, I'm so excited. Dynamite. Anyway, Kane seems to be venerated / invoked by the Druki a lot during war. So what is the role of Eldrazor? Has he been pretty much sidelined by them, or is he just forgotten by the authors?
I would say almost the opposite. The Pantheon was added to the Dark Elves afterwards. Kane was the only god to begin with. There was no further Pantheon that got added by Gav later. Eldrazor, though, is not a god of war. Eldrazor is a god of combat, which is quite different, and its capability at arms. And you'll find the great gladiatorial pits, for example, of Eldrazor, which is very different to going to war, which Kane is far more interested in.
Eldrazor for the Wood Elves and the Dark Elves is very much shown as like a god of. It's almost like a performance. It's a skill. It's something to to like it's worship through not just fighting, but like excelling at in a rate, like because the Sisters of Slaughter are like full on adherents of Eldrasor, and for them it's not just enough to kill something; it's attaining the perfection of killing something. You see something kind of similar, even though they do it for different reasons. But there's something similar in like the event that the War Dancers of Loic do, where they release a prisoner by letting them fight a War Dancer, and the goal is to cut them as many times as possible before they die, which is very Eldrasor. Eldrasor is just, yeah, like Andy said, he's not really a war god. He's more of a god of an art. It's just that art happens to be deadly.
The art of fighting, quite, which is very different to war. War takes that into account, but that's only a part of the greater thing.
Drip, are there any pure evil races in Warhammer, or are they all at least somewhat to be redeemed? Well, tell me, the Drip Critic, what is evil?
Yeah.
Define evil.
It depends on whether you, number one, objectively believe in evil and what is evil. Because by many people's definition, the Dark Elves are irredeemably evil. That is pretty much their entire raison d'etre, to be evil. But I think that simplifies that entire species, that group of elves, to a degree that almost makes it seem nonsensical. Chaos, in many respects, is seen as pure evil. And for the Warhammer world, it is. They are objectively the evil of the world. So if you want to have an objective evil, it's chaos. And everything else is then just facets around that particular coin, so to speak. Or gem would be better. But broadly, chaos only. Other than that, it's just different amounts of moral subjectivity.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. Like, if you stuck me into the world, don't get me wrong, my list of things that are evil would be super fucking long because I would be witnessing it and dealing with it on a first-hand basis. Yeah. But from like an out-of-world looking in perspective, I would really just say the Demons of Chaos. Yeah. Because even if you're dealing with like Skaven, it gets complicated.
Yeah, I mean, just look at what we often determine to be objectively evil. Slavery, for example, is generally perceived to be an objective evil. And we have several species in the Warhammer world that deal with slavery, including humans. Obviously, several human civilizations have slavery at their heart. Skaven, Dark Elves, and obviously Orcs. More are using slavery. But in the real world, slavery is all over the place, deemed to be objectively evil, yet it's thoroughly justified in the Bible. So evil is a very difficult thing to pin down. It's subjective. But if you look in the Warhammer world, evil's subjectivity is replaced by chaos. So is it chaos becomes the term rather than is it evil? And if you separate evil from chaos in Warhammer, it then just becomes, much like the real world, deeply subjective and difficult to pin down.
Yeah. So it depends would be my answer. But like I said, if you stuck me in there, oh man, it would be a long list of who is evil. I'd be like, all right, sit down, here we go. Charles, is it likely that every ever chosen was human? There was some variety. I would say, okay. I would say, realistically, from an in-universe perspective, it is extremely unlikely they're all human. However, knowing Games Workshop, I would be willing to bet they're all human.
Yeah,
even though they shouldn't be.
Yeah. The Warhammer world suffers from a certain amount of human focus, and there is sometimes good reason for that, and sometimes excellent reason for that, and sometimes poor reason for that. The Ever-Chosen appear to be human. They just do, and I think that sucks. I think that the place that the Beastmen fill is weird. I think the place that the Chaos Dwarves even inhabit is a bit odd. Beastmen in particular, the supposed children of chaos, they are the bastard offspring at best. They are not.
They're the bastard offspring of GW, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, quite. They are not well handled at all. And there are certain entities that would make far better chaos Ever-Chosens than any human ever could. Just slap that on a gigantic chaos, I don't know, Shadowth.
Yeah, so my thing is that I feel, because the thing Games Workshop does not realize is that if you allowed for more non-human Everchosens, it would make the human ones like Archaon be that much more exceptional.
Yeah.
Which is something they
agree.
struggle to realize.
Yeah, it's a shame.
You know, it's like, oh wow, if it turned out that like oh my god, I can't remember his name. The second Everchosen, whose name I can't remember, starts with a V. But it's like if he turned out to be an elf, or he or she turned out to be an elf, that would be a pretty exciting development. Or if there was a Beastman. If there was a Beastman, that'd be super cool. If there was a Chaos Dwarf once, that'd be really wacky. Not wacky in like a goofy sense, but wacky in that, because the whole point of an Everchosen is it's someone that is so domineering and so willful that they can cause the major powers of chaos to set aside their differences and unify behind a champion. That's it. That's the only qualifier, which is a very... It's an incredibly difficult thing to accomplish, but it's not human. It's just champion of chaos.
Yeah, and there's something going on there, and I think there's a really nice story which potentially should make them all human. Particularly we're falling down Prophecy or falling down Be'lakor and his crazy setup. There's definitely something going on there. But as it currently stands, yeah, they're human.
Yes. Hammond, what? So you call a dwarf ship that doesn't float? Tanker.
That's actually a pretty good one, Hammond.
Yeah, I feel okay.
You made me laugh. I like that one.
that is a joke that I would feel confident
Genuinely
saying a dwarf
good.
in universe has said to the groan of every other dwarf on that.
Yep, love that one.
Ironclad. Good one, Hammond. Donovan, I had an idea for a Nurgle cultist of Bretonnia who is a knacker who covertly spreads diseases among their horses. How effective would this be crippling the Bretonian armies? It could be...
I mean, yes, disease can cripple any army through any shape or form, Dinoman. And as I think you could probably check into real world history and see just how much disease was a debilitating factor for many armies. And when you're in a world where you've got supernatural diseases that can be spread in a variety of ways as well, you are then left with the realization that the Warhammer world has to have several entities and individuals set up to protect against this, meaning that your average Warhammer world army, particularly from the old world, probably comes hand in hand with priestesses of Shalia or some equivalent to ensure that this sort of thing doesn't happen, because it would happen all the time. So how effective would it be? Extremely effective, which means that they must stop it. There has to be ways to stop these things. Yeah. Especially because, like, man, in Bretonia, you could imagine how interesting the dynamic would be between someone taking care of horses would be such a critically important position that whether that person is nobility or peasantry could actually get kind of complicated. And it's here as well that you've got to remember that we have one of the strengths of humanity. And one of the reasons that humanity does so well is that no matter what sort of threat you throw at it, there is a god that responds against it. And in particular, disease. You go, well, that's just going to destroy all human armies. The second the Nurgle army arrives, then that's it, they're screwed. No, they have Shalians in their front rank chanting away, holding back the disease. Shalians have it as part of their core tenet to face off against the Fly Lord in particular. Is there
a god of horses in the old world?
There is Milavog.
Okay. I was like, I imagined the ancient Bretonians.
Okay, that took a bit of stretch to remember.
Yeah.
Thanks for putting me on the spot, but yeah, that's Milavog, particularly worshipped over in Ostermark.
You figure that would be a popular god
as well,
over
perhaps.
Bretonia
I need
as
to
well.
check that one up. I think it's Milavog. I'm beginning to doubt myself. I'm going to check that.
I'm going to keep us moving. Psych, what's your video on the Winds of Magic? Was wondering if tuning... Oh, that's cool. Was wondering if tuning forks could be used to gather hit rather than paying someone off the street to sing alto. So
no, it's not Milavog. It's Milavog's dance.
Oh. Well, anyway, we'll figure it out at some point.
It's the other one I said.
So, would a tuning fork be possible?
So yes, tuning forks are a common spell ingredient for high spells.
Yep.
because they help gather and store very small amounts of it. But Heish is not drawn by single notes. Heish is drawn by all the notes, and the cadence is moving from one tone to another tone to another tone. If that was enough alone, then a single tuning fork would be all that you require.
I just take me back to my music theory classes.
Yeah, quite. The Light College is basically a university of magic and music and philosophy, and one of the core components of being there is singing. Everyone has to sing, and training to sing is a core part of their curriculum. And sadly, it's not, you don't pay someone off the street. You sing alto or you sing bass or whatever you happen to be.
Yeah,
and all of the apprentices who are helping you channel it are also singing to draw the high shin.
Yeah, one of the things, if you've ever studied music theory, finding out that like Hish is very synergistic with music and that kind of understanding is one of the coolest and least surprising things, because music theory, it's mathematics. It's a very calculated, specific system, in that like how you build chord progressions and like what feelings are conjured up by the movings of certain chords and the order in which you put the chords in and like the different harmonies and how you balance them. Light magic makes so much fucking sense for music. It's not even funny. Curtis, hi, Lorebeards. How are you guys feeling? Total War Warhammer 3 wise, do you lads suppose we'll be able to the Charge of the Blood DLC? I'm not sure what you're...
I think you're saying, when do you think that the DLC will arrive?
Maybe. But how are we feeling? Good. I would say if you're asking about when do I think the next DLC is going to come out, my bet is probably late October, early November. Would be my...
You know more than me in that one.
Ballpark. Hendrik, a PC in my game is a recognized minor Wallenholt noble bastard. Oh my god. I heard PC in my brain was thinking computers. I was like, what the fuck are we talking about? She has some radical Inquisitor vibes. Can you recommend a knightly order to introduce for them?
Okay, there's a host of Sigmarite orders that are quite radical.
Like 3.
Yeah, it's none of them are strictly that alone. There's a Sulcanite order that is that. I can't remember the name of the order off the top of my head though, which is really bugging me. It's a knightly order to Sulcan. The Sigmarite orders, that really your best option would be just the Order of the Silver Hammer, which isn't knightly. That's the warrior priest order that effectively became the witch hunters, because they really are the radical inquisitors. Or alternatively, if you want to go proper radical inquisitor, you go with the Order of the Cleansing Flame.
That's
which
what I am.
are the literal inquisitors of the Sigmarite cult, and they hold a very special place within the cult where they also inquisit the Sigmarites themselves. So I would probably go down that route rather than necessarily a knightly order, where the knightly orders tend to be more complicated than just simply inquisitorial. The inquisitorial aspect tends to be not martial. Martial is what the knights are about, and that's going to war. Inquisitors don't go to war like that.
I would recommend Cleansing Flame.
The Cleansing Flame, I think, would probably be your better option.
Looking at the time and the fact that we're about only halfway, we're going to have to pedal to the metal.
Okay, pedal to the metal then.
Yeah, why do Slash demons look like insects that have pincer/claws? Oh, fuck.
Because Anthony, who did the original art, drew them that way.
Yeah,
and there was an awful lot of insectoid and pale flesh iconography running through the initial designs, and they've never gone.
Yeah, it works, but yeah, it's if you could wish for a story to be written for Warhammer and any place characters, whoever to be, a slice of life starting a gold for Thief Trader and Black Crag, political intrigue in Cathay, Skaven point of view following the assassin sent after Nagash before the Fellblade, or perhaps a parody of the Little Train That Could set in the Badlands with a Chaos Storm Iron Demon.
I would want to write The Enemy Within, and a completely different version of it again as a novel.
That would be fun.
That's what I'd like to write.
I think so. I wouldn't want to write it. I would want to commission it. But if I was gonna,
that's
honestly,
what I'd want to do. I'd write that bastard. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Honestly, as silly as it may sound, and this is probably my love for anime coming out, I would genuinely really want to do a lot of slice of life things. I would want more day-to-day focuses. Get away from the war. I would want to get away from the war and explore what it's like to live in various places.
Just as a general comment concerning that as well, one of the more popular set of streams that we've had for LAWhammer have been what we call our Tales of Middenheim, Tales of Ubersreich, Tales of Altdorf.
Great, I love those.
Okay, and all of them are side streams where you get to know the individual character who's in that stream a little bit better and what their life is like. Now, sometimes they're doing some epic-y stuff, sometimes they're doing some very strange stuff, sometimes they're just kicking around having a chat with their friends. And those streams have gone down very, very well. So yeah, I think Slice of Life is something that Warhammer forgets because they're so focused on getting their character to their next big war.
Yeah,
but it is Warhammer. No surprise.
My biggest thing would be I'd want to get away from the tabletop game,
Yeah.
which of course GW doesn't want to. But that's what I would.
Of course it doesn't, because they're there to sell miniatures.
Yep. What race do the Greenskins like fighting / respect the most? I imagine they respect the ogres since the might makes right thing seems to overlap a lot with Greenskins. So within the setting itself, you tend to find there are different answers depending on the tribe. There are some Greenskins that really like fighting the Warriors of Chaos. There are others that look at Chaos and go, nope, that's spooky. I don't like it. There are some that really enjoy fighting dwarfs. There are others that look at dwarfs and say, no, they're boring. They hide in their holes all the time. There's some that enjoy fighting Umis. There are some that enjoy fighting. It just depends on the tribe. I'd say ogres is probably a fairly reasonable
in fact,
pick.
I'd say ogres are right up there. The ogres not only are fought against, they fight with. That's something that the orcs don't do very often, is work with others.
Yeah, you can punch each other and then punch up
and
against
the
people's
ogres
foe.
are often fighting side by side with orcs, whether that's ogre mercenaries, which are super common, flitting from one orc side to another orc side to possibly being on the dwarf side next week, because of the very nature of ogres. But yes, I think you've pretty much highlighted the perfect example. Ogres are the best bet.
Brian Woodall, do you guys think the old world / Warhammer Fantasy World will possibly be reformed by the new gods of Age of Sigmar? Hilarious, but no.
No,
No,
I doubt it, Ryan.
So.
It'll be its own thing.
Hammond, Cornus the Smith, I see why Valkia has alopecia. I'm surprised you were able to make that work. That was a real reach around. Charles CK, if you were going to play lore cleanup with the Riemann Empire / Republic, do either of you have some random ideas to up to its lore prominence? Or Geezer? Well, hey, I would immediately rename Geezer. Oh my god, I would bury that so hard.
I'd rename it. I wouldn't bury it per se. I would definitely do this, and I would tie the Riemann Empire directly through to Myrmidia, and Myrmidia's arrival, and the Riemann Empire coming after Myrmidia. So, which means I would have Myrmidia happen around about 300 IC, so about 300 years after Sigmar came around, and then the empire afterwards that came from what Myrmidia had put together. So it would have a divine birth, would then be the Riemann Empire, which would spread out with conflicts coming from Estalia, which have their own version as well, and then work from that, giving us a long period of about maybe 300, 400 years of imperial history in Tilia, as it then separates out into all the city-states. So I would definitely do it up, and I'd clean it up and tie it through to the existing lore as it currently stands. Yeah, and I think it would make sense of many of the Dogs of War, make a bit more sense in terms of its overall history.
Yeah, heavy agree. There's a lot of fun things you could play around with it. It would also help a lot for fixing Games Workshop's extreme desire to have Talea and Estalia be like global powers that like were the first explorers and like invaded a lot of strange places around the world without really explaining why or how they were getting away with that. The Riemann Empire would clean up so much of that.
Yeah, and you could have it all the way through Estalia, into Tilia, into the Border Princes, affecting Araby down in the south at that early point, so between 300 up to about 600. So we've got ourselves a global power there, which turns into a different type as they then devolve into city-states and individual kingdoms over in Estalia, each of which have got their own individual strengths, some of which have risen to massive prominence in the old world because of their naval power or whatever else it might be.
Yeah, I would really want to do a fun story of them kicking the shit out of the Skaven, at like really showing off how awesome they were, but then of course the Skaven using their humanity against them, that leads to the fall of the Empire.
I'm a little disappointed that it wasn't picked up. I that was another thing that I wanted to focus on. We had that as part of our third dive.
Yeah, that should have
into
been the
old
main
world stuff.
focus up at Arms, but.
Yeah.
Biofoot 78. What's the best way to remove fisherman blood from woven wool? The same seems to have happened 3 days ago. Need to know by Tuesday. Suck it out. Yeah.
Harsh.
At the night market, I sell Krimgelto scented candles. Get out. I call the police on this.
I'm delighted to hear that they're being sold.
Archimagio, do you think Thugni is still a canon ancestor god, or has he been absorbed by Greg? He's still canon. He's still out there. He gets mentioned in Total War Warhammer.
Yeah,
he has a weird place in that he has to cooperate with the other ancestor gods to get runes made. Ancestor gods are they're a familial unit, which helps explain some of the weirdness of it. But B, they also were actual individuals. They weren't like mythological gods. They were actual people that were on the face of the earth and doing things. So they don't work the way you would expect gods to work, because they're not really gods. There's something else. But he is still a thing. Yeah. That being said, GW really likes the
speeding on. You're doing that thing.
Yeah, I'm doing that thing. You serve food originate from Lustria and Nagaroth, unlike our world. Yes.
Probably, I would say, rather than yes. But those certain foodstuffs, yes. But those ones, probably. Because the Warhammer world has examples of the writings where they've been kicking around very early. But the answer is probably. But you've also got to remember that we've had elves trading around the world since time immemorial, so it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, especially because a lot of the elven colonies would have had a lot of those things brought over from other places, as opposed to the human empires doing it. Charles C.K., did the old ones create the greases that they did in 40K? We don't know. They brought them here, but we don't know if they made them. Aaron, questions from my glorious Longbeards. What would happen if Snorri went to Ulthuan with Malekith to root out the courts? I think Malekith would break due to his father and mother. Dude, Snorri having gone to Ulthuan would have been a wild storyline.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's a shame we didn't. I mean, it wouldn't have made sense because it was more their relationship with the colonies. But I don't know. It would have been different. I will say it would have been different.
It would have been an interesting plot line.
Yeah, man, Marathi would have fucking hated Snorri Whitebeard. Johnson Scarecrow, do you guys have any fantasy settings you really like outside Warhammer and Moorcock?
Yes.
The big ones for me.
So I've read all those, and broadly speaking, through my youth, I devoured every single type of fantasy that was out there through my very young days when I was reading, say, the Belgariad, as it was all the way back then, to Michael Moorcock, which I started reading when I was about 8, because I was an early start. I read Tolkien when I was about 10. Found him stuffy and boring in comparison, and then it just went on and on and on through so many different other fantasies. So yes.
I need to start reading Brandon Sanderson. I got some books of his on my shelf. I haven't started reading them yet. Inheritance Cycle was big for me when I was younger. I love the Inheritance Cycle. Hammond, what can men do against such reckless hates? Reproduce, King Theoden. I mean, hey, if it works, it works. You frequently said how going to war without spellcasters is very foolish in Warhammer, in which case how the Empire's armies managed to survive before Magnus the Pious. I know magic was outlawed everywhere, but in large parts of the Empire, was it just priests made up for it with miracles?
The Empire had fragmented. It didn't exist, and there's wizards everywhere. And the Cult of Sigmar didn't like that at all, but the Cult of Sigmar had very little power in comparison to what it has later after Magnus binds the Empire back together again. So you would have local priests decrying whatever particular magic user may have been sitting in the court, seeing it as an agent of the ruinous powers, but in truth, what could they do? There's wizards everywhere. Just take a look at the old world. There's going to be wizards everywhere there too.
Yep. Zar just popped on break. Looking forward to watching after work. Why won't CA give me the beautiful Kimric Titan? Maybe they will. All things in due time. All things in due time.
But how will it be? Yeah, totally. Yes, hopefully.
Would you wait? Oh yeah. Which character would you like to bring back to Age of Sigmar, and what would they do in the Mortal Realms? Generally speaking, bringing back characters is fun, but I find it something you have to use very cautiously. That being said, I tend to prefer it for the races that have basically not changed, as opposed to the races that are very, very different. So like the big one for me is either Tehenwin or Krokar for the Seraphon. I would want either of them back so badly. So badly.
I have no strong preference.
There you go. Does Yuan Bo have flaw or weakness, or is he a Gary Stu? Yuan Bo is exceptionally arrogant. And he tries to lord over his siblings, which makes them resent him, and they will not work with him, which is him fucking up his job. That's the easiest one to point out.
Yeah, easily.
Aaron, thank you very much. I believe that how the almost lifted up species is they took a few select few that were the epitome of aspects of their race and elevated them into gods and taught the skills they needed, like Lord Croak's top pupil could have been Hecate. Thoughts on this?
I think that's probably not the case. Because the gods are most certainly separate to humanity, elves, dwarves, et al. The only ones where this is the case are the dwarves. It is the case there. The ancestor gods are almost certainly uplifted dwarves. And they are given extraordinary capabilities and bonuses. It's not the case for the elves. The gods themselves are of the aether. It's almost certainly not the case for the humans as well, because their gods are of the aether. Now, you could tell a different story, which would be that the gods were created by the old ones because they uplifted species to make them more influential on the aether, and thus the species themselves created their gods, you could argue, but not the other way around, that they were once mortal. The whole ascension thing appears to be something that was very much put in place by Chaos, as they took something and made it different. But is that the truth? Maybe not, because I'm now going to contradict to Aaron and say, could you make that the story? Yes. It would slightly contradict the established lore, but sometimes the established lore is just a myth and it's wrong. So this story absolutely could be the case. And the gods could just be ascended versions of their individual species.
Yeah, you could run with the idea that the only reason the ancestor gods didn't is because since they're dwarfs, they can't.
They can't, exactly.
So they're the only ones that didn't, if you wanted to run with that storyline.
Yeah.
Hagen, do the rural nobles in the Empire protect themselves from the hordes of the forest and worse other rural nobles? Also, happy anniversary.
The state armies. The state army is a large part of this. This isn't the real world. In the real world, maintaining an army was debilitatingly expensive because it is expensive. But in the Warhammer world, it's an absolute necessity because there is dangers all over the place. So they have a very different style of economy, which has worked for their individual example in their fantasy realm. So they have themselves the state armies and wizards and a whole variety of other potential sources to protect them from what sits on the outside. But yeah, they maintain and hold armies.
Yep. Where does the Dark Elf society / psychology come from? When do they go from one side of a civil war to having screaming souls swirling around their towers and murdering and pillaging everything in sight?
Okay, it comes from the elves. The elves were always like this. What happened was that during the Sundering, they went in two very different directions and only took some of their deities on both sides. So the High Elves are as bad as the Dark Elves in that they have lost all of the, let's say, the Dark Elf side, and all the Dark Elves have lost their High Elf side, so to speak, meaning that these elves originally had all of this, which is one of the reasons why I say Masters of Shyish, the elves.
Yeah, if you go watch our, I think our Kane stream and also our Malekith stream, one of the things we talk about quite a bit in both those streams is Enlek, which is where the Phoenix King Anarian held court. It's very Dark Elf. It's so Dark Elf.
And that's long before the idea of a Dark Elf or a High Elf exists. But that's very much in Ulthuan.
Yep. Jack Flanagan. Hello, Andy. And Sotek, friend and I are currently making a fan Warhammer Culture of Humans inspired by Mesoamerican mythology tied to the ancient city of Quintex. Awesome. That part of the world seems pretty sparse. Was there any major lore I should include? Nope, there's nothing written.
Yeah, no, there's nothing really written. If you want to look back at the very poor examples from Warhammer, you can do so, but I wouldn't.
I wouldn't recommend it. Yeah,
I wouldn't recommend it. If you wanted to have some sort of tie through to the Amazons, you could, but they're very, very far away. I wouldn't worry about it. I'd make it your own thing.
The Warhammer has a couple of major blind spots, and the majority of the continent of Nagorond is a big blind spot.
Huge blind spot. On it. Naggaroth is just very poorly put together.
Yeah, because the Dark Elves are only around like the Great Lake region.
Yeah, they're basically Canada. The Dark Elves are Canada.
Yeah, the America is just empty.
It's just
Sorry.
empty. Well,
Yeah.
what's in south of Nagaroth? Fuck knows.
Yeah.
I
John
make some pretty damn good ideas, but they're not canon.
I'm also in that boat. What is holding back the Dawizar from conquest? Their tech industry would imply much more success to their corner of the waste. Go watch
They're dwarves.
Yeah, they're dwarves. Expansionism is not how they do things. Go watch the Mingles Nagrin stream. That was one of our favorites. It's like one of my top 5.
Yeah, it's a good one.
It's a really good one. We talk a lot about that. But one of the things you'll see a lot in the dwarf writing is that they're building up, but dwarves just don't act that way. They're very slow and methodical about how they approach things.
Yep.
Soren, any interesting beastman versus dwarf wars in the lore? And what do each of you consider to be the most interesting rare faction matchup in the lore? So I will say, as far as interesting stories go, if you actually go read about Tarex, there was a time Tarex was making a mess of things, and he got close to some dwarf holds. There's also some notes. Beastmen, dwarves are really good about if a threat starts coming towards them, they tend to close up the hold and lock the door, and that is very effective against beastmen. It's extremely effective against beastmen. So you don't tend to see them getting in as many punch-ups as you might expect. But that's why. As far as what most interesting rare matchup, I would say for me personally, as far as like a matchup that has happened that I wish we got more details on because it's really fun.
I'll tell you the one that gets me. When Warhammer 5th edition came out, they somehow justified their Lizardman versus Bretonnian setup. And it was a bit weak, but was a core matchup for Warhammer for about 3 years, because so many people had Lizardmen and Bretonnian models that was their core battles that they were playing. And that was, for me, quite interesting to see the stories that spun out of that as they attempted to make sense of that crusading city down at the south of Araby and the Lizardmen that had come up to try and deal with that. And it turned into an enormous diorama at Games Day, where they had literally thousands of Bretonnian models holding off against a massive invading Lizardman army, which is well cool. But yeah, I mean, the rare matchups are not, they're all interesting in their own way because they're all telling different stories. It's the stories that get me.
Yeah, I would very much agree. I think probably the favorite one off the top of my head, I mean, anything involving the Lizardmen. The Lizardmen are criminally underused in Warhammer. So are the Wood Elves.
It's because they wrote them as isolationist weirdos who sit in pyramids. They pretty much stymied themselves, which is why in later editions they go, oh, pass to the old ones, they appear anywhere. Ha ha! Because they kind of needed a way to do it. They did the same with the Wood Elves. The roots, the world's roots, they can go anywhere. They're not isolationist and stuck here. Honest. Yeah, okay. Weak sauce. Yeah.
Urson, hey there, Law and Sotek. My players have a real chance to be the Tomb Prince. How would a Tomb King undead look like to a wizard's witch site? That's a fun question.
Bad.
Yeah, it would look pretty fucked up.
Yeah, so Dar laces through the very makeup of how they are put together. So it is going to be creeping, crawling, and awful to your average wizard. They are not going to get on. It's going to be a little bit like meeting someone who's diseased. You're going to look at it and recoil. It's going to be bad.
Yep, a soul trapped in a decaying corpse is not nice to look at for anyone for any reason.
Particularly when you consider that the magic behind it all again is dark black magic. It's not good.
Dynamite 95. So the elves think the human god derived miracles are just strange forms of magic, but how do they feel about lores like ice magic and Nehekara?
It's as far as they're so first the 8-wind model is what they gave the colleges of magic. That in no way says that is all the forms of magic, because there are various parts of the lore that say that there's more. So how would they take in all the rest? By saying it's magic. It's just those humans over there are using different aspects of it. It's magic. They're all broken. Humans are rubbish. We don't like them. We do it better.
Yep, there you go. Bones, could the mortuary cult eventually achieve true immortality and give Cetra's golden body post Nagash? What are the other dynasties promised similar? So
yes.
Could it happen? Yes.
Yeah.
What of the other dynasties? I mean, the other dynasty, everybody was promised the same fucking thing Cetra was. That was what got the mortuary cult so much power, but also kind of got them into trouble, was that they kept promising the same thing to everybody, and they didn't really necessarily want to fulfill that promise because it was going to come back to bite them in the ass. But you have individuals like Kotep who if he had enough time and he went to the right places, theoretically, I would say, yeah, he could absolutely pull it off.
Yeah, look, Warhammer World has immortality. So that's the first thing you have to get very clearly in your mind. It exists. And the Warhammer world has immortality of form as well as immortality of soul, which means that the processes exist to keep a body in its natural state almost forever. One species has that almost at its core, and that's the elves. There is definitely a process for allowing this to occur. So could it occur? Yes. But could they take an existing mess up and give it a golden body later? That is a very different setup, and almost certainly turn it into a construct instead, because there's no easy way to return them back to what they once were.
Yeah,
but again, it could be done. I imagine there would be a way to do it in the end.
Should the Skaven have unique clans over the unknown worlds, such as Southlands Crash and etc.? Should they be limited to the known world? No, they would have unique clans. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Keep in mind what we've talked about, that the big great clans of the Council of 13 are not necessarily just themselves. They're made up of large conglomerates. So they would be allies with those clans for various things. Plus, funny enough, a lot of people don't know this. There's a good, 2 members of the Council of 13 whose clans are very mysterious, and we know, nothing about them.
Yep.
So they could easily...
There's a lot of space.
Nights Out, could we give an Ostlin nerd out with sources, maybe? Sources...
Okay, your best... Ostland was first properly detailed all the way back in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition. As they moved through the Enemy Within campaign, it got its first details. As we moved to second edition, Sigmar's Heirs as a book for second edition gives you your first proper look at the place and gives you an idea of what Ostland is like. If we pop into places like, say, the Tome of Salvation, you get a lot of idea about Ostland's religious inclinations, and indeed we get Guvar as well, the bull god. We then head over towards... I forget which Archives book it is, 4th edition, because I hired Anthony.
Second Archive, I think.
Possibly. But I hired Anthony Reagan, who wrote Sigmar's Heirs, to do a revision of all of the provinces, and he dived into Ostland as well. It's in one of the archives there. I can't remember which one, because I didn't produce the book. I hired him, told him what to write, had a big discussion with him about how to write it, and then we got it into place. But I didn't do the final edit on it. It would have probably been a little bit different if I'd done the final production run on it. But that doesn't really matter. But it gets picked up in there as well. Yeah, it's Archives 1. There we go.
Yeah, Archives 1 has some good stuff.
The book originally had a different name, but it's Archives 1. So there's a bunch of places for you to dive into your Ostland lore.
Darman, some of the lore describes Cetra as reuniting Nehekar, but what the heck was it? When the heck was it united beforehand? Everything else is Nehek. Nehek was the first one who united. That's why it's called Nehekara. It's the land of Nehek.
It's land of Nehek. So he did it, and that was the true golden era, and Games Workshop forgets about it again and again and again, and it really fucking bugs me.
Yep, go watch our Cetra stream. Did we do Cetra? We did something.
We did something.
I'm pretty sure we did Cetra. So go watch that one.
Sure. Did we? Yes, we did. We did.
Okay, good. Derek Ellison, when did the Nehekarn stay dormant? If they all awoke, couldn't they dominate? No, they start fighting each other. This happened. They all got up at the same time, and it turned into a clusterfuck. Yeah,
you got to remember that these people do not agree with each other. It's not as easy as that. To effectively imagine them like the old feudal lords of the past, where each one of the feudal lords would bring their horsemen. And all those feudal lords would get together to form the army. So Cetra's sitting there, and he pulls upon all of the various tomb kings who bring along all of their individual undead, and half of them don't agree with Cetra. So already we have problems.
What's worth noting is that this is an empire that spanned thousands of years.
Yeah.
So think about how much culture changes just within a century. So you have all these.
Many of them think of themselves like Cetra, because they were the true king. As far as they're concerned, they should be in control.
Mess.
The place is a mess.
Yeah, so no, they don't work well together a lot of times.
It is somewhere though that I feel desperately needs a book to explain it all, because it hasn't really had one.
Yeah, Laughing God, I unironically preferred Manfred's 6th edition book as compared to his whole swole, stone cold Steve vampire look. I felt the original look suited his personality better. What are your opinions? Yeah, the later version, they did some stuff to be like, yes, as he got swole on dark magic and vampiric power, he turned into this bald, goofy looking thing, compared to his original design, which it is.
I prefer both. He's a Karstein, so Karsteins have quite a few shape-shifting powers. I have no issue with him being one and then turning into the other when he goes to war.
I agree. And that's, I mean, in the actual lore, that's what he does. He appears different depending on the situation.
Yeah, I have no issue with them both being the case.
Yeah, the tabletop minis and the art you often see is the easiest way to say it is that is like their battle form, which is like they're going full bestial. Like Vlad doesn't look like a gross undead corpse all the time. It's just some of the time.
Yeah, and exactly the same way that dryads don't look like trees all the time. They look like
magic be crazy, y'all.
No, they look like elves.
Here, I enjoyed the Wolf Buzz of Ogla Khan and Tribes and Tribulations. Is there any more lore about the hobgoblins and human lands?
Not a huge amount.
Criminally, no. That was Tribes and Tribulations. I really liked that book because of the fact that it included a large section on hobgoblins.
Yeah.
Which is mainly because they're supposedly going to be a big focus in the old world. So Games Workshop was like, hey, include hobgoblins. Well,
let's see if that ever happens.
Yeah, we'll see hopefully more of them in the future. Morns and Crescent, do you have a favorite Warhammer conspiracy theory? Oh my god, I have so many.
So I'm going to say this one here. I strongly disagree that Teclis taught the color theory to limit Empire mages. If anything, he was doing the exact opposite. He was doing what he could to ensure.
He said that as a conspiracy theory, though.
Yeah, but I'll say I don't particularly subscribe to this one, but I do subscribe to because of Teclis's teaching, Empire wizards are much less powerful than they potentially could be, but they're also safer. Because of their teaching. So it's a sort of 50-50. As to a favorite conspiracy theory, I don't really have one because I like telling lots of different types of tales, and sometimes that means I'm creating my own conspiracy theories, but they're true in that particular tale. So I can't really say that I have a favorite one. How about you?
Mine is that Sotek and Sigmar are very explicitly related.
Interesting.
Crow 312. My question is too long for your super chat. So can you try to?
Yeah, I've already started that one. You'll find it in the next comment. You'll find it in the next comment. I popped in the next comment, the starred comments.
Look at Andy covering for it. Can't say the answer.
Do you want me to grab that?
Tomorrow. Do all vampires turn evil or selfish? Could a vampire be the hero of the people? Yes, there are good vampires. Genevieve, good vampire. Ulrika, fairly good vampire. Vampires tend to be tragic. Is the better way that I put it. Evil and selfish? No. Tragic? Usually. Vampirism does come with some very negative aspects. The more someone relies on it and leans into it, often the more disconnected they get from the humanity, which leads to bad things.
Did you get the starred comment? Or are you not going through the starred comments? You're just going through the comments in order?
No, I'm looking at it right now.
Oh, you've got it. Oh, is that it? Oh, I've gone mad.
That's the one I just went out.
Hilarious. Oh, I was sitting there scrolling through it going, oh, where is it? I started it. Because I watched that one come through and you're busy reading it. I'm an idiot. So, yes. Do all vampires turn evil or selfish? The answer is yes, but personality gets over it. Yeah. So, basically, their core nature is filled with dar, for want of a better description, meaning that their core nature is this beast that rises within, but you can override that with intellect, and some vampires do. Some do not, most do not, but their overriding base value is a far darker version of life than your average mortal kicking around in the mortal planes.
Yeah, there are heroic vampires. Some of them are even heroic in unusual ways. The best, but like Ulrika and Genevieve are really good examples.
Yeah,
Fire Pingo, first time / long time. Is there a historical old world hinge point for which all / some of the order races could have forged a stronger military alliance than they ended up doing so? I mean, hell, the Great War Against Chaos is probably a good example of it could have ended in a better alliance than it did for like the elves and the dwarves, for instance, if they were there.
The Great War Against Chaos in 2302 should have made the equivalent of the Warhammer United Nations. Given what happened in Ulthuan, given what happened with Nagaroth, given what happened with the dwarves there, the Empire, Kislev, it could easily have become that, but it didn't. If there had been, I think, a different writer, they might have even written something like that at some point, because the Great War Against Chaos in many respects was much like the Great War, the First World War and the Second World War, and the desire after the Second World War for no war like this to ever have the same effect again. So the United Nations was created to effectively stop this sort of shit from happening. And I think that the Great War Against Chaos, given that we now know that that's not just the first, second, third, it's basically the 12th Great War Against Chaos, maybe the 13th. By that point, there would have been a desire and a push from the now massively waning High Elves, given what happens over in Ulthuan, to realise that they can no longer deal with it by themselves. And I think that the High Elves would have been behind a push to start preparing for the next incursion of chaos, because they know it's coming, because it's come 12 times before. This isn't anything more than just simple logic. And we have a Phoenix King with Finubar who absolutely is outward looking. It, to me, makes sense that Finubar would have said, now we need to bind the old world together. Look what Teclis did. Without him, it would have fallen. We will save the old world in classic high elf arrogance. We will be the ones responsible for this.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's an untold story there.
Yeah, there is. And I would like to see that attempt fail. So I would like to see that perhaps be part of the old one story, or the old one, probably the old world story, where the old world tells about the eventual incursion.
We must bind together. This is just elderly nonsense.
Yeah, totally. And I would like it not just to be the dwarves fuck it up for everybody again, because they're often used as comedic, stubborn idiots, and to the point that they're beyond memes. They are literally stupid, and I hate dwarves being stupid. Dwarves being justifiably angry, being justifiably upset, but being actually stupid, man, that needs to be carefully handled, because often they're beyond humor to just silly.
All right, we gotta keep moving. Garg, Skaven or Secret of the Empire, is this Sim Cathay? We don't know. We actually do not know what the Cathay situation is on Skaven. I'm
going to guess it's exactly the same as the Empire, in that the dragons, a whole bunch of sugargun up at the top, they'll be all aware of it. But
yeah, go watch our whatever the hell the capitals, Wei Jin stream. We actually talk about Skaven and stuff. Do the vampire cats use skin wolves? Not skin wolves, but in the old lore they had werewolves.
Yeah.
And I would not be shocked to see those come back.
No, neither would I.
Simon, what could be the Norse Code rework DLC? I mean, opponents, the storyline, since we did get a lot about units and plaques already for the Red Host. So I am really, really hoping we get a big Famir focus, since they decided to put the Famir as part of Norska. I would really like Muna Mim, who's a character that Cubicle 7 invented with Games Workshop's help. That would be a really cool character. But if they're pulling from stuff that we already have, the most likely case is going to be What's-His-Face from Tarmacon, Sile the Faithless. He's not Norscan per se, but there's not really a lot of Norscan
that seems more likely, doesn't it?
Sile the Faceless seems super likely, in my opinion. Greetings from Sweden, lurking with Dark Deeds. Not sure if you discussed this, but do you think Hatchet originated from one of the big four and Ascended Mortals independent creation? Go watch our Zarnagran stream.
Zarnagran, we've answered that one at some length, 21CS.
Yeah,
I do recommend watching that one. It's a good one.
Gold theory. Go watch that stream.
Yeah.
Ray, first time super chatting. How do the Dark Elves
treat
their monsters? Treat their monsters. Are there any treaties better or any treaty worse? So generally speaking, the Beastmasters of the Druki are not described well. They're brutal.
They're brutal. And they do not treat their monsters well. They treat their monsters in classic cruel fashion, because they believe cruelty will bring the loyalty that they demand through fear. They believe in control. Now, not all Dark Elves do that, in the same way that not all humans take care of their animals well. Because, in the real world, we've got what we consider to be proper animal welfare rules. This is how you do stuff. But does everyone do that? No, some people are horrible to their animals. In the same way, some Dark Elves are actually really quite nice to their animals. But generally speaking,
notably
cruelty.
Treats Seraphon very well. Like Malekith really took care of Seraphon.
There are very different views amongst individual Dark Elves as to how to approach this, but the core Dark Elf belief is cruelty wins.
Yeah, whips and barbs. Yep. Mm-hmm. Which guard halberd unit Warhammer is the best? Tabletop wise, I will say Phoenix Guard fucking so much better than all of them, because that 4-up ward save was bullshit.
I do love the Phoenix Guard.
4-up ward save was just
silently taking you on.
Yeah, dumbest shit in the universe. As for which is the best, honestly, it kind of depends on at what, because they all actually have slightly different focuses. Some of them are bodyguard units, some of them are more offensive, some of them are more design. They're designed for different things. But on tabletop, Phoenix Guard, not even a question.
You tend to find that the answer is often the elves, whether that's fair or not. Often is though.
Yeah, I would say for me, it would probably be between Phoenix Guard, Blackguard. Depth Guard are interesting, but they're not super well developed yet as to what exactly they are.
Celestial Dragon Guard might end up being amazing.
Yeah, true, because a lot of them would be borderline actual shooting. 10,000
totally.
If you had to make one new variant for each tier 2 lesser demon, what would it look like?
That's a
man. Super fast.
10,000 ads, pardon me. I descaled you by 10. To each 2. Oh man.
Okay, so I will say that each tier 2.
So a new variant for what, like the bloodletters and the daemonettes? Is that what we're looking for?
Yeah, that I believe that's what's being asked.
And the plague bearers. And
I will say bloodletters with like dual axes.
Horrors.
That would be cool. Instead of just the big two-handed swords, I think something that's a little more berserkery would be fun with like smaller weapons.
Smiths.
Oh yeah, Hellsmiths would be great.
Hellsmiths would be pretty awesome. With big axes, big massive, or maybe
honestly,
a big hammer.
A lot of my answers with this would be things that exist in AOS now.
Yeah.
Of like, I really like the Slanesh demons that like play using people's bodies as like musical instruments.
That model so much.
Like that as like a more larger concept, like creatures that attack people and use music.
They're basically a redo of the Noise Marines.
Yeah. But in demon form, that's really cool. Zinch, I don't know, just fucking these just hard because it all gets so messy.
The horrors.
Yeah, I think between the 3 versions of horrors that we have now with AOS, that's plenty of horrors. I would make something very, very different. But I don't know what, but I would make something very different. And then plague bears are actually kind of interesting. That I would definitely want to do something with them, but I don't know exactly what.
The plague bearer,
because they could, I feel like they could have more variants, but sorry, like we got to keep moving. Well, what are your thoughts on the map of the Warhammer world? Do you think it could be way better if you had to cast a massive Olgu spell to alter the memory of the fan base? Would I make any changes or additions? Probably.
So you don't really need to worry too much about that because Games Workshop just redo the map as they prefer anyway. So I don't think it would be a massive issue, Phil. But my thoughts on the map is that it's a bit of an inconsistent mess, and that Games Workshop themselves don't really know what they want from it, and are willing to change it for each game.
Yeah, I would also add a lot more islands.
Yeah, the number of islands
that the
and
Caribbean
lakes
just doesn't exist in Warhammer is bizarre to me.
The lack of islands is always, it's because the island is always, the very first maps were world scale, very simple, and then when they drilled in, they didn't add the complexity.
Yeah, which is goofy.
Yeah, it's goofy.
Because in my opinion, it's there. Games Workshop just hasn't detailed it.
Yeah.
Faithful Fred, is there a pre-Dark Elf race in Nagaroth? Yes, there was. We don't know.
There's a bunch of them actually. Some of them are down in the underwater, the undersea. I forget its name. The subterranean ocean down there. Some of them were on the continent that was above. There's ancient cities that have been lost. We're aware that there's almost certainly locals that were there when they first arrived that got kicked out or pushed away or whatever. But we don't really have any details, which is a bit sad.
Yeah. We actually talked about this earlier. Nagaroth is very unexplored.
It is.
And for why, we literally don't know. Czar94, forgot to ask earlier, are there any books that are all about the Tomb Kings versus the vampires? Go check the Serpent Queen does.
But I was going to say Serpent Queen. Oh.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Serpent Queen is literally... the Masters of Death, the book 1, which is Neferata, features a number of Tomb King scenes.
Yeah.
So that would be the only other one. Chef Chelios, hi, Andy and Sotek, are there any more stories / lore about Scarbrand other than getting summoned by Skaven and getting crushed by Khorne? Not really.
Stories, no. I mean, Scarbrand's been kicking about for a while.
He's in the army books.
Yeah, exactly.
In Age of Sigmar, he is a huge character in first edition. So I would genuinely recommend reading the Realmgate War saga if you want to read about Scarbrand, because he's very well written in that saga. He's treated as the big bad of first edition and given a lot more respect than he normally gets. He's treated quite well. So I would probably recommend that.
Good choice.
Schwartz, any idea for a hilariously flamboyant Bretonian Duke? Oh, got an idea for a hilarious flamboyant Bretonian Duke seeking fame and fortune with the lady laughing her ass off / face palming his antics / deeds. That is probably a character that has existed. Yeah. Thank you very much for the membership, by the way. I'm waffling on a Marienburg army. The independence, diversity, disinterest, and conquest appeal to me. Dutch Empire without the genocide. But in the old world, they're dirty and imperial politics. Any thoughts?
I think that a Marienburg army is one of the most ridiculously underdone things so far. It should have been done. There should be one. It'd just be great.
Yep, agree. Does Chaos Undivided have a mind of its own, or is that only purview of the Chaos Gods? Chaos Undivided is not like a force. It just means that you're not on anyone's particular side. Yeah,
you're just worshipping the ruinous powers.
Yeah, Diamond, it's kind of like how Vulcans are sometimes used robots. In regards to Luzerman earlier, yeah. Two questions. Sorry if they've been answered. What's the easiest fallen dwarf hold to retake? How did the Chaos change all the races of the world?
Easiest.
Yeah. That's a man. Jesus.
And how did Chess change all the races? Literally every single, according to many aspects of the lore, every single species in the Warhammer world was changed by the coming of Chaos. All of them. And they became different.
Yeah, if you read I think it's the 7th edition, you can find these all online very easily. If you read the 7th edition Demons of Chaos Army book, it explicitly goes race by race and says, this is how the elves changed, this is how the dwarves changed, this is how humanity changed, this is how the Slann changed. So you could check that out. Easiest dwarf, none of them, they're all fucking awful.
They are.
Modern day, probably, as weird as this sounds, Carrick Ascal, and it's a fucking mess.
Interesting.
But it has a dwarf settlement outside of it that is well established, and they're working their way in. So, it's getting there. Marathi, what are the caverns beneath Warhammer like? Are they like deities Underdark with mushroom forests, other biomes, and more barren / how Skaven survive? Yes, and more. Yes, and more.
Yeah.
Spooky. A lot of the time. Very spooky. Can I add Hydras to my old world greenskins? Would Familiar greenskins use them at all outside of Total War? I'd say, Hydras showing up Total War, you can have Hydras in your greenskin armies. So if Total War can do it, you can too.
I'd have no problems with that at all. Loosely speaking, the Hydras are rather randomly dropped, mostly over in Nagaroth these days. Although I think the idea that they're not in the old world is just daft. So I'd have no issues with that at all.
Yep. And I'd say Famir, considering what Hydras are, Famir having those kind of aquatic monsters that come up from like the fens and the marshes and stuff. Yeah, cool, great.
Yep, totally.
Based on what we know about the Monkey King, do we expect him to have an additional role in lore when he eventually comes introduced in the game?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say he's probably going to be a fairly big deal.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Arton, could the dwarves retake Blackcrag post Gorfei? Probably not. Not realistic.
It's going to be hard.
Yeah.
I mean, could they? There's always a could, but the chances are super low, particularly with the dwarves, where they're now a race in decline. They don't really have the resources to do the great retakings.
Yeah, and the moment the dwarves start trying to do that, you have to keep in mind that when Gorfang dies, that creates a power vacuum that's going to draw in lots of greenskins, which makes it really hard.
It's going to turn into a mighty Wah.
Yeah, if you could sit and take a drink with anyone from Warhammer, who and what would you talk about? Us, Marathi, she's seen so much, we ask about her past. You would want to chat with Marathi? Good luck, dude.
I mean, assuming Marathi was in one of her better moods, brilliant. Yeah, Marathi would be great to have a chat with. But could you trust anything that came from her serpent tongue? I think the answer would probably be no.
If he was awake and conscious the entire time and would not destroy my mind by talking to me, Mazda Mundi would be pretty high on my list.
Yeah, it's still not going to happen, though. You're not awake, not conscious, mind blown.
He's just going to be asleep the whole time, and then my brain's going to get blown up anyway.
Yeah, totally.
This has probably been asked before, but what exactly does the term Vermintide mean? Is it a holiday, a spell, or a phenomenon? So the original Vermintide was a spell. And then the video game turned it more into like, it's a tide of Skaven. It's the Vermintide. Yeah. But
it was originally a spell that gave you a whole ton of rats that just moved across the battlefield for 4th edition as the first place where it's dropped in the Skaven army list, and in the Magic box set. And then it was just used again and again by various other writers and indeed the computer game.
Yeah, so the term is kind of conflated a bit, but it really generally is referring to the spell. It's a tide. It's exactly what it sounds like, a tide of vermin.
Yep.
Xandrain Swagger, do Druki always deal shittily with Athelorn / Larlorn, or are they legit enough to have embassy representatives? Curious about elf diplomacy.
Yeah, so Athelorn is not exactly a place of deployed embassies.
They allow you to come in and talk and then tell you to leave.
So the answer in Athelorn is no, but when we move to say somewhere like the Lorelorn, the answer is probably yes. There are going to be consistent connections there.
Yep.
Now, as the lore is currently written, perhaps not, but in my version, definitely yes.
And Dark Elves are not always dealing shadily. Often they are, but not always, because Dark Elves are smart. They know that the best lies.
Dark Elves are, as it says in the Dark Elf Army list, the most recent version in the 8th, they are the most canny politicians of them all.
Avinius, there we go.
Avinius.
Elven colonies. How much do we know about them? Is there some obscure ones you particularly like to explore? We know criminally little, considering how important they were and how long they existed. They only really get brought up in the War of Vengeance, and that's really it. Which is dumb because they should be way more important. Obscure ones that I'd really like to see explored. Any of them? Like Athel Tamara in particular, I'd like to know a lot more about. But like any of them would be nice. Like I'll put it this way: for how important all of them are, like the 14 sieges of Tor, what's it is, but like any like the big one where the dwarves attacked them 14 times because it was like the capital of the colonies. Is there a map of it? No. Because there should be, but there's not. Checking the motion pictures. The ancient widow secretly the law god Astasis.
No.
No. Yeah.
No. That was easy.
Yeah, Garg, Cathay has a strong emphasis on the Wind of Vizier. How does this focus affect our culture? What are the benefits of it? Why does Shin Zhang support it? So Shin Yang was born under supposedly a strong move of Vizier, to the point that his egg is like radiates with it, and it seems to have a deep effect on him. And as far as how does the affect their culture, if you listen to Andy talk about earlier about how like lots of Vizier might affect people, they're a very, oh my god, how do I say this? I think a lot of their...
I'm going to say that it doesn't.
Interesting.
I'm going to say that their culture is affected by the winds of magic, and that the Great Compass is channeling the winds of magic throughout Grand Cathay in such a fashion that there is a much more balance. Balance is at the core of Grand Cathayan culture, rather than focusing on individual winds, rather than focusing on just one aspect of it. I would strongly argue that the Wind of Vizier does not influence overall Grand Cathay more than any other wind.
Yeah, I think the big thing is you'd want to explore is how it affected Shen Yang, because it affects him deeply, because he is obsessed with the future, utterly obsessed. And the benefits of it is that he foresees a lot of things and can avoid a lot of bad things.
And we do have a lot of astromancers out there too.
Yeah, the downside is he's not always in the present as much as he should be.
Quite.
The Laughing God. What do you think of the Skaven clan as matriarchal naked mole rat inspired with Murloc and Lovecraftian themes? That they're boogeyman Skaven others. Clan Murkloc. So very fun idea. I would recommend watching the LAWhammer series if you want to see a really interesting version of different kinds of female Skaven. There's a very, very fucking cool character that shows up in one of Birdie's side streams. I don't want to go any further into that for spoiler reasons, but you can play around with what rat mothers are while keeping them vaguely coded to what we know them already as.
Yep, absolutely. That. Go watch LAWhammer. 100 episodes. This
Friday. 100 episodes. LAWhammer forever. Yeah, an eternity of LAWhammer. Hey, Andy, on your off time, I recommend you check out Hunter, the Parenting and Norfolk Wizard game for World of Darkness fix. Love Alpha Boosa's teamwork.
Interesting.
It's a YouTube thing.
Hunter, the Parenting. Nice.
We use the term races for a lot in fantasy for out of character history reasons. But should we consider species? Yes.
Absolutely. I made that the case in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition. We dropped the term race entirely because race has a specific meaning. Race is an individual grouping within a species. A species is a different species. And in Warhammer, they are different species. Elves can't mate with dwarves. Dwarves can't mate with humans. They are very different species. So species is more appropriate.
I am 99% sure the reason we have that terminology comes more from the fact that in the war games and the video games, all of them tended to start off with all human cultures, so the different factions were different races, and that terminology just stuck, even though it's not actually appropriate.
It's not good, and I personally steer away from it heavily.
Dynaman, what if one of the Lost Dragon kids not only fell to chaos but became ever chosen?
Well,
you could tell Sonya.
Hell.
Yeah,
that would be awful. That would be awful.
Psych, wanted to ask questions during the Neferata stream, but forgot. Andy, what is your take on the Mage, the Ascension,
So
And
Mage
does have
Ascension, I
effect-
think, is great. In many respects, Mage Ascension is at the very core of the World of Darkness, and it arguably is the World of Darkness. It just in terms of how it presents its worldview and exactly how it manifests. Its effect on my take on the Winds of Magic is actually surprisingly low. The Mage Ascension is a far more adaptable and open style of magic. Although having said that, when I was speaking at length about this with David Chart, who's one of the writers for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition, David Chart was behind a lot of Ars Magica, which was at the foundation point for what became the Ascension, and had very similar let's say magical components involved with it. And some of those conversations did indeed influence some of the Warhammer writing.
Leopold the Random, what about female ogres? They must surely exist. I've never heard of read one.
They did, and we discussed them earlier.
Yeah, we discussed them earlier. If you want to read about them and see some cool art, go pick up Cubicle 7's Tribe and Tribulations book. It's the ogre section is pretty good. Dryman, hey guys, long time watcher, rare chatter. I just want to say appreciate you both done. Appreciate you guys' optimism, and to me, you both make the best Warhammer content out. Oh well, thank you.
Thank
really
you
appreciate that.
so much. That's really appreciated.
Jeremiah, follow up. Does Marienburg have colonies? It probably should. It should.
It should. Absolutely should. And the fact that it doesn't is a crime.
Yeah.
An actual crime.
Warrington Crescent, the signature spell of Fish is Machiavel's Canon in D.
Boom!
Trip Critic, on the earlier comic, could greenskins live kind human... Oh, could they live kind human lives feasibly?
Nice.
Beastmen or Skaven? Is xenophobia...
No, greenskins
integrating
are not
with human culture. Okay.
The greenskins are not just culturally different; they are physically different. They are actually different. It takes something extreme for them to act in a way that would be considered human. They are not human. Beastmen, though, completely different kettle of fish. A lot of what they are is culturally driven. They are basically mammals with intellect. And could that intellect be channeled in a different way? Absolutely. Skaven, though, they have quite a different, not just intellect, but not just culture, but way of responding to the world. Their instincts lie in a slightly different direction. So could they end up living a human style life? Yes. Is it likely? No, but it could happen. You got to remember that many species enslave all of these. So for example, the Dark Elves enslave Beastmen and Skaven and Greenskins, which means inside Dark Elf camps, you'll often find all of these working side by side, living lives together in a way you will not find in other parts of the old world, or indeed the Warhammer world as a whole. So they do have not just cultural issues getting between them, they have actual physiological issues getting in the way because their actual brains work differently. But could they feasibly work together? The answer is yes.
Yeah, I would say it's for Beastmen and humans in particular. I would say anyone... There is somewhere in the deep dark forest of the Empire, there is some sort of culture or group that exists of beastmen and humans that have figured things out.
It's almost certain.
Yeah.
The
they don't
Empire's
get
too
talked
big
about,
for that
but
not
they're
to be
out
the
there.
case.
They're out there.
Come on.
Psych, are the Gospodars of Kislev linked to a goddess their title suggests, or was it just a name Games Workshop took from Eastern Europe and nothing else?
Sadly, it was a name that was lifted from Eastern European names and nothing else, and I was left in a position where behind the scenes I wanted to make this a thing. My Gospodars, when I was writing about them, had come from the Eastern Steppe, right about where the Hobgoblins had come from and further north, and they had hiked it all the way across to the World's Edge Mountains, invaded across there, and then come down the slopes like a great tide and wiped out all of the indigenous folk that were there. They are an Eastern coded folk, but they're not Eastern in the way that we generally perceive them real world, because they have blonde hair, they've got brunette hair, they've got red hair, but they were as a people Eastern, and they were seen as very beautiful by the old world because they were effectively exotic, because they were different. Anything that's different is generally perceived to be beautiful the first time you see them because people are weird like that. Oh, look at that weird exotic species. But that changed. The gospel part of it just lost entirely. And it is literally a lift. And I wanted to write in a justification for that and was told not to bother, so I didn't.
Yeah, if you really want to do a stretch, there is the whole... You could run with the storyline of, like, they heard the voice of Kislev or the Ancient Widow, depending on how you look at it, calling them
that's no stretch. That's what the book says.
Oh yeah, well I was gonna say that's
no stretch.
Canon.
That's utterly fine, but it's not in any reference to their name. So it's not a part of their name.
It should be.
And it should
that
be.
makes sense, but,
it would have been a core component of but no, sadly not.
Yeah. Darius Rose, are there any stories on the Tong or the Rule of Fortune? Yeah, the Tong get a really fun paragraph in the Tome of Corruption. So go read. It's very easy to find on the internet. Go read the Tome of Corruption. The Tong are awesome. In my personal headcanon, this isn't explicitly stated, but in my personal headcanon, the Tong are the thing that set the Chaos Dwarf situation into motion. Of that, the Tong were the ones that came down because Chaos Dwarfs didn't happen until after Chaos had already been defeated. Like, the vortex was already there, so it had to be a mortal force that isolated them from the Karazhan Core. And in my version of the story, it's the Tong, because they are that fucking scary.
Yeah, the Tong is scary.
Usul, the first, Lorebeards question. The player had an idea for an undead hunter and Wolferup. I was talking with him, and the idea came up to be trained by Harold Hammerstorm without knowing exactly who he is. Ooh, that's kind of fun. So she hasn't gone full Chaos Martyrs / Worshiper. The real can be fun. Is this past the realm of ridiculous? You can go for that.
No, you could go for that.
Easily go for that.
I'd run with that. That'd be fun. Harold Hammerstorm, certainly a fun character.
He fucking hates undead.
And also a character that has a history that many don't realize, which I'm so many, in fact, that when we pitched a version of Harry over to Games Workshop, we literally got told by them that's not what the character originally was. You can't do that. And I went back with, I have the original author here. He wrote the character to begin with. This is literally what the character originally was. And they went, oh, right. Well, that's interesting. You're not doing that, but we didn't know that. Is that really the case? Yes, that's the case. Holy shit! So yeah, go with that. I think that's a good one.
Yeah, I think that would work really, really well. Yeah. Especially, oh man,
that was a loose aside of way of saying that it's potentially going to be a character that pops up in LAWhammer.
Well, there you go. Peter M. I've always wondered if there have ever been characters that started from simple lives, such as Gardener for Nurgle and Aviculturist for Zinch or Bothell Worker Slanesh. Yes.
Yeah, all the time. And they're very common in the roleplay game.
Yeah, in fact, a lot of the big bads, a lot of the people that become big bads in Chaos often start very humble beginnings. They're not all like badass Templar warriors like Archaon was. A lot of them were much more humble than that.
Yep.
I mean, look at Festus. Festus was literally just a doctor.
Yep.
And he became super fucking scary. Agar89, how impressive is Grumroll compared to other metal allies talked about in the lore? Is it still being mined by the Dawi currently? I know it's supposed to be a lot more rare than it is in the past. Yes, yes, and yes.
Yes, and yes. Grumroll's awesome.
Yeah, it's up there with Ilthomer as like the two top tier metals.
Yeah.
Cheer, I'm making a timeline at the moment. It's surprising how rare Chaos is directly involved with major events for large portions of the history, particularly between the formation of the Vortex and the Rise of Sigmar. Yeah, it's weird.
It is ridiculous.
It's weird.
It's just weird, the timeline.
Our job. It's weird.
I'm attempting to try. I once tried to figure out the Everchosen, and it's a mess.
Yeah, we talked about this quite a bit before. That if you go back, the original Everchosen showed up at the Vortex, which made 13 Everchosens over many years make sense. As 8,000 years instead of 2,500 years.
Yeah.
Jamaican Runa.
And they really should go back to that.
Yeah, Jamaican, what we know about the Monkey King, do we expect him to have an additional role in the lore when he eventually becomes? Yes.
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Bolt Boy, Elf Pantheon stream soon. Yep.
Yep.
Seth 55 or my Wolfram games, a running joke that Ulthuan is a prison for elves that makes them Australians. Thoughts? Hilarious. They pick up an accent when they go home. CB4N, do dwarfs make beer? Yes, they do. Yep. They even have dwarves. Yeah, they're dwarfs. The brewing is important to their culture still. Now, it's different, but it's still important to them. Darius Rhodes, so the women in the Chaos Tribe treated in the egalitarian sense like the steppe of our world, the Mongols were they respected by their own. So it depends on the tribe, but for the most part, yes. Women have a lot of power in the Chaos Tribe.
Yeah, you tend to find that the more sexist societies are the ones that are more civilized, sadly. Civilized. Yeah.
I mean, think about Valkia, for instance. Valkia was the big boss of her tribe and several other tribes. There have been many. There's a funny joke written in some of the books about how there have been kings of Norska, but king does not necessarily mean they were men. That the term king is
I would
used
just sum it up in general and say that in the Warhammer world, sexism is much less of an issue because magic does not play to people's sex.
Yeah. Shadisian, I once read the Colleges of Magic move around. So there are no proper maps of Altdorf. Love this idea, but can't find it anymore. Did I imagine it?
Okay, so that's Spires of Altdorf, dives into that as an idea, and they don't move per se. What the streets themselves are confusing. The magic that's throbbing through Altdorf makes it difficult to navigate outside of landmarks, and that you can see a thing in the distance and you go for that rather than individual streets. It's bullshit. It was purely because they didn't want to make a map, and they didn't make a good one. They just used the old one.
To be fair to that book, I would have preferred that than what second edition did when the fourth edition did with their new Crown of Altdorf book, where the map is just bad. Like the colleges are the weirdest.
All the colleges in the same place.
Yeah,
what the
district.
fuck?
Like, terrible.
Just bad. Yeah, agreed on that one actually.
Gingerglack. Any clear cases of Discworld and Pratchett references in Warhammer Fantasy?
No. There's lots of influence, particularly as you actually no, there's not a lot of influence. There's little influence. There's lots of player influence in that the players of Warhammer often use it as a cultural reference point. And the fourth edition artists, a few of those were strongly inspired by Pratchett because they didn't know Warhammer, so they went to another amusing fantasy that they were aware of, so they were thus inspired by Pratchett. So you'll find that in some of the fourth edition career art, for example. A lot of that has got an almost cartoony Pratchett feel, but broadly speaking, not a lot.
Which is weird, honestly.
Yeah, it is.
Warzags, how does a new Wind of Magic get created?
That's a question.
That is a question. If that were to happen, it'd be a pretty fucking big deal. As far as like the core setting is concerned, that's seemingly impossible. If it were to happen, that would be a dramatic, epoch-changing event.
Yeah, it'd be huge.
Curtis, hi, Lorebeards. How do you lads feel? Oh, I think we already read this one, so I don't know if you resubmitted it, but thank you. We appreciate it. We're looking forward to this so-called Charge of Blood DLC. Thank you. Leon, would the Lizardmen invade the old world if they think it would serve the Great Plan? Yes, they would. Without a moment's hesitation. And they have done it, yeah.
They would, and they have.
Yeah, there's at least 3 or 4 canonical invasions of the old world by the
mentioned the Bretonians and the Lizardmen before. That was our first big one.
And
in terms of the
Gehenna invades Slagmire, which is in the old world. We're not. It's if I recall correctly, there's a map that shows it being somewhere in like the Grey Mountains.
The Dark Shadows campaign that took place in Albion. Loads of Lizardmen.
Yeah. King Zombie, what's the most powerful tribe in Norse and why? Depends.
Whichever one's winning.
Yeah, it just depends.
There is
maybe
no
the
most powerful. There's lots of tribes, and sometimes one's in ascendance and sometimes another one's in ascendance, but none can be described as the overall most powerful. Some of the most horrific, some of the most awful, some of the most but some of the most normal, but no.
I will say mainly because there's a big character associated with them. The Islings do tend to get billed as pretty big bad. But that's because Valmir Isling was a big bad.
Yeah.
Sephifer, what is the situation around the Boiling Sea navigation between Nagaroth and Cathay? The Boiling Sea is extremely difficult to navigate because it's literally boiling. And if your ships are not like a Black Ark, it will eat through them and destroy them because it's also very acidic.
Yeah, but I'm going to presume that Cathay, Nippon, and Nagaroth all have methods of navigating it. Because they've been there for too long not to.
Yeah, the Boiling Sea is also noted for having some of the worst monsters in the ocean.
Yeah.
So people just generally don't like to go there, but it's the Dark Elves go there because they use it to get to Cathay, but that's also where they get like the Charybdii from. Charybdis, whatever. Out of the brothers who haven't gotten you home brewed, which is your favorite? Mine is the Slash Brother. Mine
Actually, I think maybe I agree. Out of the 3 that we built, probably.
I think mine's the Corn Brother.
Yeah, I think mine's probably Slanesh. I feel like I should say, Tzeentch was cool though.
Yeah, Tzeentch was very cool.
Oh no. Yeah.
Speaking of which, I'm going to put this somewhere. I'm still figuring out. I need a place to put Lorebeard articles. But some really, really cool people on the Discord actually went through all the streams and wrote down everything. And even like put timestamps and credited all the people that suggested ideas. I don't know where I'm going to put it, but I'm going to put it somewhere. So
I'll slap it up in, over on our Discord, we've got clear channels for that sort of shit. So I'll slap it up in there. So at least it's somewhere.
Yeah.
So I'll pop up a thread for that.
I'll put it on my Patreon as well, for free for anyone that wants to find it, just so it has a place until we have like a Lorebeards place. I don't fucking know. We'll figure it out. Warzags, if Vlad became emperor, would it be death and slavery for the liberty? You think it would have been a just but harsh, just ruler, harsh but fair? I think, he would have been very both.
Yeah, very both. I think Vlad is a poorly written character sometimes. But given the way he's normally written, I would say both.
Hilariously, one of our most controversial streams, which always makes me laugh. Some people in the comment section did not like that stream.
They did not.
We took an interpretation and ran with it. Some people got very upset.
No, they did, and I loved it.
Todd Toring, I always wanted to know about drugs of Warhammer. Do races have a unique relationship with them? Yes. What is in the gnome's pipes?
Each of the species react to drugs differently. That's number one. There's lots of different drugs that are out there, most of which are based on the various plants you find across the Warhammer world. As a single example of something that isn't, you've got Camellia Leech spit. Camellia Leech spit takes the excretions from the Camellia Leech, which effectively makes you hallucinate, so it can then just suck onto you and drink your blood as you hallucinate about your greatest desires. And the spit gets extracted and used as a hallucinogenic drug, and that works on most species, unlike many drugs which only work on individual species. And what is in a gnome's pipe? Whatever you can stick in there, but tobacco like most.
Really cool. Like, if you go watch LAWhammer, there's a very, there's a very unique drug in LAWhammer, the petals, which has turned almost into a running joke at this point, despite the fact that it's having genuinely dire consequences.
I have a picture of them, actually, because it's I have a taxonomical picture I drew of those. It's called something Gaudens.
Oh, have you put that on the Patreon?
I don't think I have.
You should.
It's one of the things. It's in my computer down here somewhere. But yeah, I'll maybe pop that up. Gaudems and Dryas.
I will say that the drug section of Warhammer is criminally underexplored, is what I will say.
We only added about 6 or 7 inside the core book, with the expectation of more being added in the bestiary, not the bestiary, probably the armory equivalent, the trappings book.
Yeah, unfortunately, that did not happen. The bloke person, the Master of the War of the Beard show the Elven cities in the Empire, but does not show that area that becomes Bretonia. Are there any that you know of?
Yeah, basically every Bretonian city has elven runes underneath it. That's a quick way of doing it.
Yeah, literally all of them.
Given our hour, we are on quick answers at the moment. I'm sorry to say.
We're almost done. We're almost done. I was obsessed with Escaping Clan based on cleanliness and being more good. I even tried to make a lore magic board. Do you think it's a possibility when my players burn me for heresy?
I think you'll probably be burned.
Yeah, you'll probably be. That being said, there are many different kinds of rodents in the world, and there are some rodents that exist in our world that are genuinely obsessed with cleanliness, where they bathe themselves in dust and do all sorts of other things like that. An offshoot of Skaven that have those kinds of traits.
If you want to do it, what I would probably do it is ritual divine cleanliness before the horned rat. So you turn them into basically monks or nuns or some equivalent. You turn them into aesthetics who are presenting themselves in the most perfect fashion they possibly can for the horned rat. So they will be seen as the weird religious weirdos that come in, and they've got odd chanting and censors to.
Man, and them and Clan Pestilence would fucking hate
each other. Exactly. It'd be super fun. So you get a little bit of
what is fun about that, though, is genuinely the Grey Seers would likely very heavily support them because of how much they would irritate the fuck out of Clan Pestilence.
Absolutely, particularly if you've got them wearing white as well. So they might even be central towards supporting the Grey Seers as a whole and revering white fur and cleanliness. So I reckon you could build a pretty good one out of that.
Yeah, and if you want to make, and you said good, so that part might
the good I would be. I would say morally speaking, from the moral perspective of the Skaven, they would be good because they'd be following the Horned Rat's footsteps.
Yeah, I love the idea of, like, if you want to make them typical horrific Skaven, like, imagine the dust, they do dust bats like the rats in our world, but they only use the dust of, like, incinerated corpses to make sure. It's like, yeah, they were great. Bones, what is the difference between a werewolf and a skin wolf? Are werewolves more of on Karsten? Okay, so we've talked about this before, of that skin changer.
So many types of fucking wolves in Warhammer.
There are thousands of them. There are thousands of different kinds of think of every possible thing you've ever seen in any form of pop culture about how someone could turn into a werewolf and what that werewolf looks like, and you go, wow, there's like
Warhammer.
a billion different versions. They're all canon, all of them.
Until we've got to all the super chats, because we refuse not to, because you've thrown money our way and it's only right.
Yeah, we're in the process of wrapping up.
We're getting there, but we would like to finish properly because it's only
the last
fair.
thing I'll say, Bones, is that what you're asking is technically different than what I'll be answering. But what I'll say is what most people are thinking of is that in like Blood Bowl, the necromantic team, which is an undead team, has werewolves.
Werewolves.
Werewolves used to be part of the undead faction, even though they're not undead. They were still part of it. As Warhammer evolved, they got more associated with chaos. Werewolves did. They're like, oh, they're more of a chaosy thing, but they're still also a vaguely undeady thing, being that they hang out with the vampire counts, even though they're not undead, or they might be, but they're probably not. But they could be. This Warhammer. Mornington, will we get a how Moorcock influenced the birth of Warhammer stream?
Possibly. I mean, Moorcock is only one of multiple authors. Obviously, Tolkien had a significant influence as well, but Moorcock had one of the largest because chaos itself comes from Michael Moorcock's work. Yeah,
that could potentially be an interesting thing at some point. I think the thing there is that Tolkien has survived very well into the cultural zeitgeist and is very present modernly, whereas Moorcock, the vast majority of people...
close. Yeah, it was so close. We were going to get a movie. We were going to get an Elric and Melniboné movie just after the Golden Compass, but because the Golden Compass failed, they cancelled the movie. And then Gran Bretagne, BBC picked it up, and they're going to do it with HBO, and then COVID hit, so it got cancelled. God damn it!
Yeah, so unfortunately, because of that, he's very unknown for modern
Yeah,
fans.
absolutely true.
Like, I'll be honest, until like people like Andy bring him up, I had no fucking idea who he was. In America, he is, to my knowledge, in America, he's completely unknown.
You know, he lives very close to you. He lives over in Texas.
Does he really?
Yeah, he does. He's still alive.
Is he still alive?
Bless his soul. Yeah, he's still alive. He's very poorly, but he's still alive.
Oh, wow.
In fact, Blue Oyster's cultist just mentioned that. Lives in Texas,
yeah. Jennifer, I need to ask about pronunciation. Pronunciation inconsistency, Jesus. Throughout the media. Magic nation cities, etc. Is there no unified pronunciation? No.
There isn't, and it can be explained by lower dialects, and I think that's the best way to do so. Games Workshop themselves don't pronounce things consistently either. Both with the people who created some of the terms, and then they say, no, I created like this, but the common term as it's used by the audience is different. So they end up going with the common term rather than what the creator originally intended. And that can be hilarious. I mean, the number of things that I've created that I've seen other people call very different names, and you just roll with it. People can call it whatever they want. I'll use whatever pronunciation I prefer, and you probably will do the same.
Yep, there you go. Poor Manatee, what's your opinion on the Great Beast? How would you make its followers different from regular Undivided? So I don't know if is the Great Beast a fantasy concept or is it only AOS?
Yeah. No, it does, yeah. And my opinion of it, it's massively underdeveloped and needs more work.
Yes. As far as how would its followers be different, think more so Undivided. Don't think of Undivided as I worship the god named Undivided. It is I worship the polytheistic pantheon of all the chaos gods.
Yeah.
In whatever measure suits me. As opposed to the Great Beast, which would be an actual entity. So they would be quite different. Muffin Baskets just made this podcast become one of my favorite podcasts ever pop up. Each year, loves for the old worlds draw me back in with double boots. Our loves for the old world are... you interpret the term love differently than I do, but we appreciate that.
Do you mean obsession? Is that what you mean?
We bitch and moan from a place of love. That's
we
true.
do. We do that also.
Thoughts of Princess repitching this.
Cripes.
Dakala versus Apophis versus Malopod for Warhammer 3 denied and the damned. Racist need rework better than Hiles versus Dark Elves again. Thoughts? I mean, I'd buy it. Don't get me wrong. It's cool. I'd buy it. I don't know what you want me to say. Yeah, sure, that'd be cool. That would be a weird, interesting matchup. Bretonia, Slanesh, and Tomb Kings. Darius Rose, since Dark Elves in terms of sexual dimorphism and sadism, would I be in just as much danger compared to a woman if a dark? Oh, yeah. You think the Dark Elves give a fuck if you're a boy or a girl?
No, absolutely. It's all down to individual strengths, and women have advantages that men don't have. Men have advantages that women don't have, and they are raiding everyone, and they will use them all and work them to the bone in whichever particular way they're working them. And they have slaves for all sorts of things, ranging from the expected sex slaves to work slaves to mine slaves to construction slaves to everything slaves. They have slaves for everything. So yeah everyone's in trouble.
And that's if you're lucky, because then at least you're being used and you'll die at some point. Some people get turned into pets, which is worse.
or instruments. I mean,
or furniture.
Or furniture, totally.
Yeah, I've met a lot of people that are like, the Dark Eldar are so much worse than the Dark Elves because they do X, Y, Z. It's like the Dark Elves can do the exact same shit.
Yeah.
They can do the exact same shit. Now, the Dark Elf writers do not have the hardcore rubbing themselves off to whatever weird torture porn that the Dark Eldar writers are, but they can do the exact same thing. It's just the writers they tend
to gloss over it with and they are very terrible in how they use their slaves and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Can any member of Chaos be redeemed? Yes, theoretically.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Frankie, who was Biuna and what was so Fate of Biuna? There's a two or three sentence paragraph that just talks about Biuna was a great. I can't remember if he was a merchant or a king, but he was this great, very wealthy individual who got essentially cursed by some notable Shyish gimmick, and basically he started laughing, and he laughed so hard that his belly ruptured and split open and he dies, which you may look and go, that's a weird story to associate with Shyish. And I go, yeah, but it's also fascinating.
Yeah, you got to remember that the original purple wind is not the purple wind that we have today. The original purple wind was Slaaneish's wind. And people losing themselves to an excessive state, to laughter, for example, was a core of what the original Purple Wind could do, where you would be lost to, for example, fits of laughter and similar. So the Wind of Shyish has changed over time. Now it is pretty much just death and similar. But originally it was different, and the Fate of Bjuna is one of the original spells.
Yeah, that's actually why, if you're playing Total War Warhammer 3 and you cast the Fate of Bjuna on someone, the big purple skull shows up and it's laughing. It's because it ties back to that thing of that you... It's... If you think about what the spell's actually doing to people, it would be horrifying to witness.
Oh, yeah.
Very gross spell. Watchdog, what are the pink and brown winds of magic?
We already done this already.
You came back for more. This time, one of them is the wind of undercooked meat, and the other one is the wind of overcooked meat.
I like that one.
That's the real difference. Darius, are ye the same? I'm not sure what this is talking about.
Are same in terms of RE.
I'm not sure. This is tying back to this,
maybe,
but I'm not sure how.
So, the elves in general can be difficult for non-elves to recognize as male or female unless they're miniatures on a Games Workshop battlefield where they all have giant boobs. But as we discussed in the Kane stream, the witch elves do stand as somewhat of an over-sexualized, let's say, outside example of that. They do not follow the standard elven norm.
Peter M, if you had to make Nippon Lord, how oh, if only you knew. How important would demons be? If only you knew.
I would recommend watching LAWhammer.
Yeah,
there is a lot of answers in there.
Yeah, go watch LAWhammer, especially get caught up, which is going to take you a while, but get caught up to the most recent episode, which is a 4-hour stream of just Nippon lore by Andy. Andy's homebrew version of Nippon, I think you will find fascinating based on how you worded this question. I think you will like it a lot.
It's definitely a thing.
Korinshima, does the Norska tribe / non-demon that side with chaos in the end times know they will die in the end of chaos once this world will blow up? Who says they did?
Yeah.
Would be my answer to that, because that's not technically what happens.
Yeah, the Warhammer world blowing up didn't actually kill everyone, as we all know, so it's definitely an interesting end.
Yeah, and for those that just are unaware, when the end times, when things happen, the world doesn't just blow up, it gets kind of consumed by chaos and blows up a little bit after that. And it's noted that like Archaon and like the Legions of Chaos, many of the mortal followers are literally swept up by the gods and taken to other planets to continue the great game. Archaea goes on to destroy several other worlds. That's why he's known as the... I can't remember all of his titles, but one of the things they explicitly mention is he's destroyed dozens of planets by the time we catch up with him in Age of Sigmar. Jamashian, does each species have their own unique language, which is simply translated to English so that we all understand, or does English exist and everyone knows it as well as their own unique language? More of the first
Far
one.
more than just each species. Multiple species have multiple languages. Elves speak more than one version of Eltharine, for example. They speak more than one language. Humans speak multiple languages. Dwarves are the only species that are generally perceived to have mostly one language, but even they have got the Dawizar version, the Dawi version, then also the Norscan dwarf version, which is a different. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
There is multiple languages for everyone, so yeah, it's a complicated mess, which is just like the real world.
And then the last one, and
You're kidding me?
really
Have we
have
actually
to
done
get
it?
out of here. Somehow we fucking made it. Urzin, thanks for all the answers in the stream. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
That's a really nice thing to end on. Some great ideas to put in your Warhammer game, and that are more lore friendly than what you had in mind. Marvelous. That's just lovely.
So
what
thank
a nice
you
thing
all
to end on.
So much for coming. We're a fair bit over time, but that's okay. This was a lot of fun. This is great. We got to talk about a lot of really cool shit. We will definitely do another one of these in the future. We'll definitely do this much more often than once a year. I genuinely apologize it took us so long to get around to this as an idea.
Yeah, as we discussed before, we're aware that many of you have got lore questions that you would like to see answered. And I do occasional, quick ones for half an hour on some Saturdays, but they're really short. And this gives us an opportunity to take a little bit more time to go over lots of cool stuff. And we know that there's loads of questions we'll never address in our core streams because they're about one often important topic in Warhammer, where there might be just some sidey thing you'd like to know more about. So yeah, we'll definitely do one of these again in the future, but a huge thanks from us both for all of the super chats at the very least, but also for just coming along and making this worthwhile. Next week we're doing something that we've been kind of hankering after for some time.
Yeah, so for those that are unaware, we are celebrating the anniversary event. We've had some posters up on social medias and stuff about the next 3 weeks are bespoke for Sundays. So next week we're going to be doing the End Times Part 2. So if you want to see nerd rage, it is the stream for you. We are going to be bitching because we're going to be tackling a lot of the later half of the End Times, which the first half had some redeeming
First half was
points,
pretty decent in places.
It doesn't at all.
Oh, next week's going to be a thing.
Yeah, so it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be over on the LAWhammer channel. Just
LAWhammer channels next week.
So please make sure you're subbed and stuff over there and following his Twitch channel so that you don't miss when that goes live. And also check out all the other stuff going on there. The only other thing is that we are still doing stuff on Wednesdays, and so because we're not doing votes for Sunday stuff, I have to talk about Andy about it. But I'm going to
why don't we do that afterwards?
Yeah, we're going to figure some stuff out. So we will see you all soon. We have to get out of here. Lindsay's on the train. Cool.
Lindsay's on her way home. Brilliant.
Good.
Let's put a smile on my face.
So thank you all.
See you soon, Lindsay.
We will see y'all probably on Wednesday, but if not, definitely next Sunday. Please take care and have a lovely day.
Until then, bye-bye.